blast from the past.
Please listen carefully.
CoCo.
Welcome to the CoCo Crew Podcast. A delicious adventure into the world of retro computing news and information. Featuring the Tandy Color Computer.
Hey, you got your CoCo 3 yet?
CoCo.
All right, very good, very good. The crew is assembled. Let's get on with the show. Welcome everyone to the 37th monthly episode of the CoCo Crew Podcast. Woo!
Woohoo! We're here again.
Very exciting. Got a full house this evening. Of course, I'm John. We've got Mr. Rowan, Myro. How you doing, Mike?
Hey, I'm doing good.
We got Mr. Blanchard. Neil, how you doing, boy?
I'm doing great, enjoying the hot weather in the north here.
Hot weather in the north. That sounds a little wrong, but okay. Sounds good. And Mr. Boise Pete, how you doing, Boise?
Doing fine.
Good, good. All right. Oh, let's see. Getting along. This Tandy Assembly is coming up in, 5 months? Very exciting stuff coming there. The CoCo Fest is... they announced a date. I think I've got it in here. Yeah, it's going to be in early May this coming year in 2019. So it's about 10 months away to CoCo Fest. So very exciting stuff. You guys have been keeping busy doing any cool projects or anything?
No.
Oh, well, okay. It is kind of the doldrums in some ways. It's a little bit hot, and people try to get out and do some other stuff. I've been working on some stuff. Not really sure what I'm doing, honestly. I'm kind of messing around. I've been saying for years I want to do some compiler work, and I recently had bought an old book on small c, and small c is sort of what it sounds like, although I think a lot of people don't realize that small c is literally truly a different language than just plain old C. It's similar and sort of upwards compatible, but it has some differences in the language itself. Anyway, the book's on how the compiler is implemented. It's got, source code and everything. So I've been looking at that and thinking about what sort of projects I can do around that. The compiler itself is targeted towards DOS, and I've been thinking for a while I should maybe do an MS-DOS targeted project, and then thinking, well, maybe the compiler could be retargeted to something else, like maybe the MC10 or whatever, or maybe a totally different computer. For a while, I've been talking about maybe I should move Farfall to an actual arcade platform, like a Galaxian machine or something like that. So I don't know exactly what I'm doing there, but I've been had my fingers in the guts of a 1980 something compiler recently, and some assemblers for different processors and whatever, and it'll take a little while till we figure out exactly what's going to come out of that process, but there'll be something.
Compilers.
What about? Yeah, definitely. What about eBay or other acquisitions? You guys pick up anything recently? No.
I've been watching. There's been a lot of CoCos. I don't know if it's time of year or just after CoCo Fest, but there are a lot of CoCos up on eBay lately.
Oh yeah. I noticed a few things. A couple of interesting items that kind of popped up here and there. Not sure anything like Holy Grail-ish, but there have been some cool things that have come across. For those that are interested in the MC10 and the French version, the Matra Alice, I've seen a few of those listings come up recently. So I don't know if spring cleaning time in France or what's going on there.
Oh, well, I see the New York Times CoCo is still there.
Oh, well, thank God for that.
And holding its steady $2.99 price as well.
It's still crazy after all these years.
Never give up.
Yeah.
Oh, Lord. But, I haven't... I've been picking up a few things here and there, but all kind of oddball things. I did pick up a DVD, the 40th anniversary DVD of Emmett Otter's Jug Band Christmas. but that's sort of a whole different topic. So, and then what about you, Neil? I do know that Neil and I both acquired some items through a certain person's somewhat famous in the retro community auction recently. You want to talk about that at all, Neil?
Yeah, we had a little luck there with Bill LaJudas's big auction. He auctioned off pretty much his whole entire retro collection he's collected over the years, and yeah, I got into a little bit of trouble with the machine, but
Well, that's cool.
yeah.
I picked up a. Go ahead.
I was gonna say you got a pretty interesting one yourself.
Yeah, I picked up another Super Pet, kind of a unspecified condition, but since I had one that was mostly working but then kind of flaked out on me, I'm hoping between the two I'll be able to put something working back together. Especially it was a power transformer on the mostly working one that went bad. Hopefully this one's power transformer at least will be good. It was actually kind of perfect because it had some case damage, and it's like, well, the other case I have is good. So I think I may have got a little break on the price since it had some case damage, and now it's my backup parts machine or whatever.
No, that's cool.
Yeah,
So,
with a machine that rare, you can never have enough parts, right?
that's probably true. I would really like to get that working and have, like, take a vacation, a 2-week vacation just to play with that. I think would be fun. It's got like 8 different languages built in, APL and Fortran and COBOL and stuff like that.
Yeah, that would be
Stuff
cool.
stuff I have never even really played with on big machines or whatever. Well, that's cool. Anyone else? Anyone else got anything new? New girlfriend? New house? New anything like that?
Well, I made a brief appearance at CorgsCon.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, to check it out.
How was that?
It's definitely for console gaming, and there was
Yeah.
very little else. So I kind of scoped it out to see if they would have some computers. They did have a few that were kind of for sale or display, but I was really kind of surprised they didn't have a lot of places you could actually play. It was mostly just trade, sell, swap tchotchkes about video games and the video games themselves, cartridges and CDs and things like that. So it was a big crowd, pretty good venue, but definitely was targeted to console gaming, which is not my bag, but I know it is. A lot of people are into that. So, but it was cool to check it out, see what it was about.
Cool. Well, I think with that, that's probably a good enough introduction. We'll take a little break, and then we'll be back with some announcements.
Now is the time to buy a CoCo. You can't lose. That's right. You can't lose. Buy a CoCo and you'll get back twice what you paid. And if you don't agree, you get double your money back. This offer is good for a short time only. So buy a CoCo right now because you can't lose.
Tandy Assembly. Tandy Assembly is about Radio Shack and Tandy computers.
Tandy Assembly is about interacting.
Tandy Assembly is about people.
Tandy Assembly is about fun.
The first gathering of its kind.
Computers of the 70s, 80s, and 90s.
All Radio Shack and Tandy makes and models.
Join us. Don't miss Tandy Assembly.
In Springfield, Ohio, November 10th and 11th.
Whether you're near or far.
Tandy Assembly is for everyone.
Visit our webpage at www.tandyassembly.com.
Tandy Assembly.
All right, CoCo Cruisers, welcome back to the announcements. You are listening to the CoCo Crew podcast. We are available on Twitter as at CoCo Crew Podcast. That's at CoCocrewPodcast, all one word. If you are prone to sending a tweet, feel free to tweet at us, and we may tweet back. We are, of course, also available on the Book of Faces or Facebook. We have a group there, and this, of course, called the CoCo Crew Podcast. That, of course, is 4 separate words. You can search for us. I'm sure you can find us and tell us how great we are, or how much you dislike us, or something in between, whatever you want. We are, of course, available on iTunes and also through Google Play as a normal podcast. Also available through Stitcher and TuneIn for streaming. And so whichever service you like, there's a few other services we've gotten ourselves either we've gotten ourselves listed on, or somebody else has picked us up and listed us because they just piggyback on iTunes or whatever. Anyway, hopefully, if you can't find us through your favorite podcast listing agency, let me know and I'll see what I can do. Of course, the CoCo Crew podcast is a member of the Throwback Network. If you're not familiar with the Throwback Network, this is a list of retro-themed podcasts, many of which are technology-oriented, some of which are more like 80s culture or other obscure things, retro things. Like there's one that concentrates on holiday specials. There's one that concentrates on the old TV show, The Greatest American Hero. Anyway, some cool retro stuff. If you're looking for other podcast listening outlets or inlets, I suppose it would be, then feel free to check out the Throwback Network. CoCo Crew Podcast is also listed on the Game by Game Podcast Information Hub. This similarly is a listing of retro-themed podcasts. In this case, they are all technology-oriented or based around gaming consoles and or home computers from essentially the 80s and 90s. So again, if you're looking for other podcast listening opportunities, feel free to check out the Game by Game Podcast Information Hub. Audio for the CoCo Crew podcast is hosted by Cyber Ears. If you have a need to host recorded audio on the internet, we recommend that you check out Cyber Ears, where you will get your audio on your terms. Should you want to reach the members of the CoCo Crew podcast via email, we have some addresses set up that will reach all of your hosts. These are show, SHOW, at cococrew.org. That's COCOCREW.org. Also podcast, PODCAST, at cococrew.org, and feedback, FEEDBACK, at cococrew.org. The individual hosts are available as well if you just want to reach out and touch one of us. I'm available as John, JOHN, at cococrew.org. Neil is available as Neil, NEIL, at cococrew.org. Mike is, of course, Mike, MIKE, at cococrew.org. And Boise, I'll spell it more slowly because I know people will mess it up. BOISY at cococrew.org. So
good job.
If you want to reach out and touch any of us, so to speak, feel free to reach out via email. All right, those are pretty much our standard announcements. And now we're going to talk about our list of upcoming events. This events list is still, it's a little short. I follow a bit behind on some of the later events for the year. I'll try to catch up by next month. Let's see, we've got Kansas Fest 2018 coming up in July 16th to 22nd. This, of course, is an Apple II event. It's a Apple II summer camp for adults, hosted at Rockhurst University in Kansas City, Missouri. It's a cool event, a lot of technical content, and, of course, a lot of retro geeking around with your buds, that sort of thing. So if you are Apple II inclined, then I do recommend you check out Kansas Fest. They may already be full this year, but there may still be time if you do and move quickly. Coming up in August 4th and 5th of 2018, you have VCF West 2018. That's happening on the West Coast. Let's see, at the Computer History Museum in Mountain View, California. If you are on the part of the United States where the sun goes down, then do check out VCF West. It's actually I think those are the original VCF show, and then it kind of went dormant for a while, and it's been revived by the VCF people. So go check it out. I'm sure it's a good show. It's a cool museum. I've been there. A little bit later, September 15th through 16th, 2018, is VCF Midwest 2018. This will be held at Elk Grove Village, Illinois. It's a cool event. It covers a wide variety of machines and platforms. It's heavily influenced by a co-located or truly the same event at this point, I think, but started as a cooperation with a Commodore event. So it may be a little bit Commodore heavy, but I think it's actually spread pretty well across a variety of platforms. So I think we've all been there. It's a cool event. I recommend you check it out. All right, let's see. Coming up November 10th or 11th, 2018. We're talking about Tandy Assembly 2018. It's going to be the big event.
Woohoo!
Big, exciting stuff. Make your way to Ohio and check it out. Springfield, Ohio. Recently updated website. They've got the hotel information and all is up. It was certainly a big event, great event last year. We all enjoyed it. And I think you'll enjoy it if you come this year, too. Very exciting. All right, and then once that rolls around or rolls over, you'll have another 6 months or so, and then CoCo Fest 2019, the dates have been announced. At least it's on their website, May 4th and 5th of 2019, once again at the Heron Point Convention Center in Lombard, Illinois. Anyway, well, that's our event announcements. Like I said, I think there's a few more for the calendar year 2018 that have been announced. Just haven't put them on the list yet, but we've still got some time. So I'll try to have those by next month. But that's on this list of events and other announcements for this month. So why don't we take another break, and then we'll be back with some news.
Meet Dr. Bjorn Vittore, one of 3,300 scientists who work on ATLAS, analyzing data from the Large Hadron Collider.
We are truly on the brink of discovering the elusive God particle, the particle that gives all other particles mass.
When Dr. Vittore needs to crunch numbers quickly, there's only one tool he turns to.
I first encountered Dynacalcs when I was at Fermilab in 1984. Our primary field was a Hazelwood Helix running OS9. It looked like a giant power supply with a small 6809 board attached. But the operating system was way ahead of its time, very powerful. We were provided load versus displacement data and used the Dynacalc to determine hysteresis at different positions of coil actuators. Dynacalc handles the calculations where the previous Apple II running VisiCalc simply lacked memory to complete the task.
Dynacalc is easy to use, easy to afford, yet sophisticated enough to meet the most demanding requirements.
I still keep a CoCo 3 in my office with Dynacalc, just a press of the clear key away. It's an invaluable tool that allows me to enter data and equations quickly.
Whether you're performing basic accounting, solving engineering problems, or even searching for the Higgs boson, Dynacalc is up to the task.
Dynacalc allows me to perform complex work in a straightforward manner. I wouldn't use any other spreadsheet.
Powerful, simple, Dynacalc.
All right, welcome back for the news. All right, I'm going to start with one that maybe a little old by now. It probably came out about the time the last episode dropped. But it's a video, though. This is from Dave Phillipson. He had this idea, how hard would it be to use the tools under OS 9 to develop for Disk Extended Color Basic? It's not a bad idea. I think it's an idea that maybe made more sense, in the 80s or whatever, when the CoCo actually was kind of your primary computer. Nowadays, I think once you're going to go to the point of cross-compiling or whatever anyway, it's just as easy to do the compiling on your actual PC. But if you're looking for that sort of authentic experience, I guess, or semi-authentic or whatever, I guess the point is he's got a video here that shows you sort of the basics of how you would go about doing this and that it is possible to write using the assembler on OS 9 and write a program that actually produce a binary that then you can write out to a Disk Extended Color Basic image and reboot and run it without OS 9. And so I guess especially if you're a real kind of OS 9 jockey like Boise would be, where you're very comfortable at the OS 9 command line and using those tools to do things, this might be a good way to spread out to if you wanted to write a Disk Extended Color Basic program, still using the tool that you're familiar with. But anyway, it's cool. Produced a video, published it out there for everyone to see. So very good. You guys check out the video?
I did. I saw he was using some older commands like rs-dos to copy the resulting executable over.
Yeah.
To a disk image that I guess could be loaded from a CoCo.
Yeah.
Definitely a different take on things. Back in the day, it was certainly, I think, more tenable to do. Nowadays, it's probably more painful. Given the the availability of cross tools, but it's certainly an interesting exercise.
Yeah, definitely. If nothing else, it proves it can be done. So that's cool. Now, let's move on. The next one is the Keyboard King Jacob Alexander has a collection of 600 keyboards. This is an Adafruit article. Adafruit publishes a lot of kind of maker sort of news items and things from learning how to solder or where to buy the best kind of switches and whatever else. I'm sure Ada will be glad to sell you some various parts for projects and that sort of thing too. Anyway, this one is a story about somebody who's kind of infatuated with keyboards. And got a lot of information there. It actually kind of reminded me of some talking to Mark Marlette not too long ago about his keyboard odyssey and measuring tactile forces and that sort of stuff. Kind of cool.
Definitely our kind of people.
Yeah.
For sure.
So a little bit of food for your reading budget or whatever, or it might be a good way to put yourself to sleep. I don't know. There is a video there that covers some of it. All right, this is Matteo Trevisan. He published a picture. Says this is going to be a good idea of an arcade remake cabinet. I think he's doing some sort of CoCo related project that sort of creates like an arcade-like experience with a custom program he's written and a CoCo running underneath, whatever. But I like the picture of the furniture, and he's basically got kind of I guess it's a bookshelf technically, but he's using it as a liquor shelf.
I saw that. I like that very much.
Yeah, that's definitely a good mix in there.
Yeah.
Very cool.
So the kind of kiosk on top with it's got joysticks and stuff built in, and you could put Farfall in there. So
I got no complaints with that.
it's a pretty cool idea, especially if you have something in particular you want to have available. If you really love playing Downland or you've got your own custom program you want to write or play or whatever, pretty cool and a neat way to display your CoCo and keep your drinking material nearby. So, all right.
I'd leave Farfall running in that 24/7.
Cool.
This next one is very interesting to me because I've always had a kind of a soft spot for 8-inch floppy drives. A member in our community, Ratveld, he's on the CoCo list, and I don't think he's really on Facebook much, but I know he's on the CoCo list. He's trying to interface an 8-inch drive on his CoCo to get it working, and I think he did succeed. From what I was reading, it's working a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like it's not quite 100%, but it sort of works well enough to kind of prove it's working well enough.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, I think there's a mismatch in the speeds that the drive controller on the CoCo is sort of at least configured to run at by default, and what the 8-inch drive expects. And, because you're basically talking about a big spinning thing, it's sort of an analog thing, so it has a certain amount of slop built into the system, and I think there's just enough slop there to make it kind of almost work well enough to sort of prove that it works, know?
Yeah.
But I thought it was really cool. I mean, I think he's actually reading code off of it and using his CoCo with it. It's kind of cool.
Yeah, that is. Yeah, it was neat to see that. Our next news item is from Jim Gary. It wouldn't be a podcast without having something from Jim.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
Another game he's working on here that I seriously cannot pronounce.
Yeah, no chance of pronouncing that. I think it's Japanese in origin, but I really don't know. A ported Japanese game by Jim Gary. Looks kind of cool.
Yeah, it's from the would it originate from the old NEC machine there? I was reading
the NEC PC 6001, also known as the NEC Trek in the U.S., as I understand it.
That's right. Yeah.
So it's the same video chip as what's in the CoCo, the Z80 processor, and the way they've wired the chip on that one is it's got some special capabilities the CoCo doesn't really have. And the CoCo has some capabilities it doesn't really have, so there's not 100% overlap on the graphics capabilities, but still, you can see whether they have some commonality, and so it's kind of cool.
It makes the conversion a little easier, I guess, right? Some similarities.
Some of it. I think so, anyway.
Yeah. Our next item is from Stephen Reed, and it's check out this awesome remake of Pole Dodge.
Another Jim Gary game, I think. Jim Gary's Tower Dodge. It says Jim Gary's Tower Dodge plays homage to my Pole Dodge 2, but with a twist. So I guess he's got a little bit of difference in the gameplay or whatever. But this is really Jim sneaking in another entry on our list, I guess. Until he got somebody else to do the write-up this time. So that's pretty cool.
Our next one is the history of the Philips CDI, failed PlayStation ancestor.
Of course, the Boise or the CDI has an OS 9 68,000 heritage.
Right. I have mine. Let's see, somewhere around here, and a stack of old CDI games and videos and things like that.
Oh yeah.
Yep.
I was really surprised at some of the titles that were available for that.
Yeah, they had some good titles. They had a Pac-Man type title and some other, like a Mario Brothers type game. It was actually pretty good. The only problem with the CDI system that I have, and it was a bit problematic with those units in general, is that the controllers tend to give out, and those are hard to find. I believe that there are homebrew projects that allow you to use other types of controllers with it. I haven't really looked into it lately, but at the time when I was using it quite a bit in the 90s, it was a problem with the controllers giving out.
Yeah, that kind of sucks. I know there's a somewhat similar system in the world called the Nuon, which is it was a DVD. It's like a standard for DVD players to implement that would turn them into a gaming console. And but it was not a very standardized standard, I guess you could say. And anyway, that's one of the things is there's no standardized controller for that at all. There's a plug, I guess, but yeah, it's like there's a few of the Nuon games that only work on certain of the Nuon platforms, and each platform came with a different controller that they're theoretically compatible, but different shapes and buttons and stuff like that. And then, like you say, when they break, they're gone. They sell on eBay for like $300 for a controller. Oh my God,
Oh yeah.
It's also interesting that he refers to the Philips CDI as a failed PlayStation ancestor. I've never thought of it in that light.
Yeah, I didn't read too deeply there. I didn't really. I'm not sure I get the connection.
The glomming onto the Mario connection is the only thing I can think.
Yeah.
Maybe so.
Mario Hotel.
Yep.
That's what it was. Mario Hotel.
Oh, well. Well, anyway.
All right, moving on to our next item. It is Simtel is back from the FreeDOS project.
Yeah. You guys ever remember Simtel? Did you guys use that for downloading DOS stuff?
No, I never did. I've used FreeDOS, but not Simtel.
Yeah. This is something we used when I was in college downloading DOS stuff. One of those FTP sites back when it was really an FTP site. Go look for wares, or not really wares, but like legitimate like shareware stuff or whatever. And there's have all kinds of stuff there. It was one of those you could buy like a CD or 2 CDs of the archive, Mm-hmm. And I guess somewhere along the line it shut down and supposed to be available again. So kind of cool.
I notice you pronounce wares properly. I always laugh when I hear people say whereas. I'm like, what are you talking about?
That's funny. Yeah, well, I like to look at pictures of my wares in a GIF format. So. Oh, Lord.
And our next item is the Computer Audio Spectrum Analyzer.
in 1981.
1981 by Adrian Black. It's basically a video walking through the Spectrum Analyzer cartridge for the color computer. It's a pretty good video. Walks through all of the different settings. You can see it in action. See the music, spectrum bouncing up and down on the screen. And
and the guy's kind of amazed that it was even possible.
Yeah.
That people just don't scope it very well what was possible when or whatever, I guess. But you got to admit, I mean, it is Steve Bjork's best game.
You said
it. Oh, sorry. Did I say that? Maybe I should retract that. No, it is fun to play with. It is a lot of fun to play with. That's all I'm really saying. Very cool.
So the next item on our news list is by Philippe Antoniosi. Some may call this heresy.
Yeah.
It looks like Philippe has created somewhat of a chimera.
Yeah.
He's attached a WordPack RS to a Commodore 64 using a Slot Expander 3 and a CPM cartridge. That sounds a lot like breeding a turkey with a horse.
It does, but it works. It's kind of funny.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Wow. I guess recreating that WordPack RS was something that he did a while back, a couple of years ago, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So he had the hardware laying around, and I guess he knew plenty about it. But it's cool that he's figured out. It's probably not that hard from a hardware perspective to interface a CoCo piece of hardware to a Commodore 64 if you're determined to do it. That's my guess.
Sure.
But then you have to make it work, and so he's got CPM running on Commodore 64, which is that's going to be a Z80 processor on a cartridge plugged into the Commodore 64. And then whatever kind of adapter he's got wired up from the Commodore 64 to the CoCo bus for the WordPack, and whatever custom software he's written to make the WordPack look like a terminal. That's a lot of stuff to go on, a lot of moving parts there, but it's pretty cool. Looks like it works really well from the video.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
good work. Well done.
All right.
Very neat. Very cool.
Royal Danish celebrity Lutonia Cruise Lines is proud to bring you the ultimate CoCo cruise. Join us for 8 days and 7 nights aboard the magnificent and luxurious CoCo Explorer 3. Embarkation from beautiful Punta Loyola, Argentina. While aboard, enjoy the 24-hour computer show floor. The 7-night sailing will welcome special guests William Barton Jr., Forrest Mims III, and Stephen Disney. On day 2, get your cameras ready for a brief exploration of the mysterious Calixto Island. On days 3 and 4, the spectacular Lonnie Falkland Islands. Spend your days exploring the beaches and mountains, or just stay aboard and continue non-stop computing. Each evening is culminated by capturing your choice of exotic wildlife and presenting them to our 5-star master chefs, who will prepare and serve them in a glorious CoCo Fest-style barbecue feast. Spend the remaining days at sea, programming, game playing, or discussing the CoCo with friends. Fares start at just $34.60 for an inside cabin. It's not just a cruise, it's a CoCo cruise.
Call your travel professional. Visit RoyalDanishCelebrityLutonia.com. Ship registry Lutonia, Milos, Panama, Luxembourg.
Next news item is from our good friend Peter Satinsky.
Yeah.
I came across some CoCo schematics which I've shared on my Model 2 archive site. Looks like he has on GitHub a number of PDFs for our various CoCo products, schematics for things like the color computer, floppy disk controller, some video adapters, speed sound cartridge. I was just clicking on one of them on the color computer schematic, and at the bottom where the information block is on the schematic, you can actually pick out the names of people who worked at Tandy on this. In fact, I see the design is Jay Prickett, which is none other than John Prickett, on June 23rd, 1983. So you can see the dates and when they did the various aspects of the design, the approvals and the checks and so forth. So this is a bit of not just a schematic of electronic interest, but it's a bit of archaeology of the color computer. and its history
Yeah.
and some of the players in it. I think that's very interesting.
Yeah, that's cool.
I presume he got these from some online source. I'm not sure where. I believe Tandy did release some schematics for some products and maybe some service manuals.
Yeah, but like I said, these look almost like scans of loose sheets of some sort, maybe.
Yeah, and
Oh,
so it
sure.
also, with the dates, it gives you an idea, when that product was coming out. It can coincide with the catalog release, and you can kind of get an idea in time when that product was under development for later release out into the field.
Yeah, it's one of those schematics is the is direct video for the color computer, and it's a schematic for the RF can replacement that has the stereo jack that does audio and video, like for the educational color computers, for the
Right.
the ones that kind of inspired, shall we say, Ed Snyder's boards that he's been making. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah, very cool.
Nice. So the next item on the list is from Dean Takahashi at VentureBeat. Intellivision lives. Tommy Tallarico will relaunch the 1980s console.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. I think my friend Tim Lindner would enjoy this because Tim is an Intellivision guy.
Yeah, I imagine Tim is into that. Yeah, this is more like it's not a project thing at all. Of course, it's just sort of retro news. But, we've all heard about the flashbacks and stuff. There were Intellivision flashbacks available. And most of us probably heard about this coming Atari VCS relaunch or whatever. And some people say it's going to be great, and some people say it's terrible. And I had to look up who is Tommy Tallarico, and I guess he was a video game sound designer that has some history back to some of the early Intellivision games. So he's like one of the true faithful or whatever. So maybe people will trust him more to get that right. If you don't want to spend money on your new Atari, maybe you can save money for your new Intellivision instead.
Well, we should write him and see if he'll release the Tandy Vision.
That would be hilarious.
Be interesting to see what actually comes of this.
Yeah.
What it looks like. Especially because the Intellivision had those interesting keypad controllers.
Yeah, I got the impression they wanted to keep something like that available. So we'll see how that works out. Get USB versions of those to hook into your PC or something.
There you go.
The next one's from Ken Sharif, I guess is how you pronounce it. And we've talked about him before. He's one of these guys who takes logic chips and basically does what they call decapping them, where he sort of grinds off the top of them or otherwise exposes the silicon layers and then looks at them with a microscope. If you know what you're doing, you can look at these silicon wafers and decipher the actual functions, where the actual electrical components are on these little silicon devices, and then build up from there to tell what the circuit is and see how the circuit works and that sort of thing. I think he's actually looked at this chip before to some degree, maybe on the analog side. And then he's got this write-up is more on the logic side, where they use integrated injection logic, so it's I2L logic. Pretty deep stuff. It's kind of an interesting read if you can keep from getting lost in it, I think. Or if you're a real VLSI nerd or whatever, maybe that part's interesting. He gets pretty deep pretty quick in some ways, so I'm not sure how big the audience really is for this, but it's kind of neat to think that somebody is out there doing this sort of thing. Take a look. Maybe you like it, maybe you won't. Another kind of computer engineering topic for the desperate among us, so maybe Doug Gabbard. Homebrewing computers with EEPROMs. So occasionally you've heard us mention something about using an FPGA or CPLD or even a PAL or a GAL for implementing some or all of a computer electrical circuit. Those are all kind of cool, and they're sort of purpose-made devices for replacing what would otherwise be called random logic. And so you basically turn a lot of chips into a few smaller chips that are programmable, that sort of thing. Well, there's a programmable logic chip that we're all fairly familiar with called an EEPROM, and it basically takes in a set of inputs, that we normally think of as address lines and produces a set of outputs that we normally think of as data lines. But just because we call them that doesn't mean you really have to use them that way. And so something that some clever people have done in the past, or this clever person is doing now, if I'm looking at this circuit board that's covered in EEPROMs, is you can, like I said, ignore that they're supposed to be address or data lines and just think of them as inputs and outputs. And by programming the appropriate blocks of data into that EEPROM, you can control what outputs you get in response to those inputs. And so you've got effectively a programmable logic chip. So it's a cool write-up on sort of that basic idea. I'm not sure how practical it is, but it might save your bacon if you're doing some sort of custom design and only have so much room left on the board. Sort of a stupid pet trick or something like that. But,
that's a good way to put it.
It's kind of a neat idea, though. If you're looking for something to do in your spare time, you might want to check that out. Okay, moving on. I should have left this one either for Mike or Neil, but this is, let's see, dial-up at home with a line simulator. And so someone's gone into some detail talking about using a device that I guess is really used, was developed originally, I guess, more for phone device testing or that sort of thing, and basically simulates the type of circuit that most of us have, or at least most of us used to have, coming into our houses. But instead of connecting out to the phone company's central office, it just terminates right there in the same box with maybe another line, or maybe in some cases just one line. If you have at least two lines, then you effectively got a little telephone network. And so if you want to play BBS from one side of your basement to the other, that's all the hardware you really need, along with the modems connecting to your computers. So I looked, and you actually can find these devices on eBay. They're, I think, $100 to $200, something like that. Your mileage may vary, of course. They are available, and so if that kind of having that sort of dial-up experience in your basement sounds like a good idea to you, it is within your reach.
I had one at CoCo Fest last year. I got a line simulator, so they're
pretty cool.
We had that running in the hotel room.
Yeah.
Good times. New Jersey, yeah.
Yeah, that was fun. Our next news article or item is from Richard Russell, and it's BBC 2 APK Android Application Generator. So basically what this is, it's a Windows program that'll take a basic file for the BBC and convert it into a APK file for your Android device. At least that's how I read it. That's pretty cool. I mean, it'd be something like that for the CoCo.
Yeah, so I thought that was pretty cool. Like you say, it's used BBC Basic, and which is not exactly the same, but not totally dissimilar from Color Basic. And like I say, you can produce a program package to run on your phone. Elsewhere in CoCo Media, apparently I have a few idiosyncrasies when I talk that are entertaining to some of the other CoCo Media hosts. And one of the things they like to sort of crib from me is the saying that this is not a CoCo project, but it could be. This is definitely, it's not a CoCo project, but damn it could be, and that would be really cool.
Right. Yeah, that would.
So,
I need colored script sit on my phone terribly.
Well, it's not the worst idea.
Yeah, no, it'd be awesome. It would be cool.
Oh yeah.
So that's really cool.
The CoCo has some good basic programs too. I mean, there's a lot out there.
Can you imagine? I mean, Jim Geary, with a little prodding, he could be the primary application developer for your Android phone. That would be pretty cool.
Huge catalog, yeah, it'd be really cool.
Oh, you out there, Jim? We're signing you up. Anyway,
speaking of Jim Geary, the next item's from him. It's Mei Zhang for the MC10.
How about that, huh?
That's pretty cool. I mean, that tile game on that machine, you wouldn't think with that resolution, but cool. He's pulling it off.
No, you can do some pretty cool stuff. You have to use your imagination a little bit and maybe close one eye and squint. but you actually can get some workable graphics out of that. It's sort of surprising. But yeah.
Yeah, it is, yep.
Neat project.
For sure. Moving on to our next news item is from Carlos Camacho. He's another active guy in the community. He's on the CoCo list on Facebook. And he is scanning in dynamic color news.
Yep.
He got those sent to him. Was that from Steve Ostrom?
I think it was from Steve Ostrom.
Yeah.
I think it's so cool. There were all these little, zines, I think people called them back in the day, but, little newsletters or other little publications. And they were literally like 10-page, photocopied, stuffed in a first-class envelope and put a stamp on it and send to the 35 people on the list kind of stuff. And I know you had some up there near you, Neil, and I know they're probably in almost every significant, not even major, just sort of significant metropolitan area.
That's right.
In North America, at least, and probably in Europe as well. Not just for CoCo, but for other platforms as well. But even, like I said, even for CoCo, there's all these little newsletters and stuff, and they turn up once in a while. You'll find 3 issues that somebody saved. Or you'll buy a box of something off of eBay, and down in the bottom, or tucked into a book or something, there'll be a couple of copies of something like that. But it's just really cool. They're little snapshots of what people cared about in 1983 with their MC10 or whatever. Just kind of cool,
Oh, it is, and it's nice to see this stuff getting found and archived, so everybody else can enjoy it as well.
Let the Radio Shack TRS-80 put the world of color computing into your home. Instant loading program packs turn any color TV into an exciting game arcade. And there's more. The color computer is an educational aid, a home management tool, an up-to-the-minute electronic information service. The programmable, expandable TRS-80 color computer from $399 only at Radio Shack, the biggest name in little computers.
Dino Wars. 65 million years ago, giant carnivorous beasts roamed the earth, fighting for territorial dominance. The only rule? Survive. Each player controls a rampaging dinosaur. If you aren't quick, you'll find yourself ruthlessly attacked by your opponent. Develop your maneuvering skills. Then declare an all-out Dino War on your opponent. Dino Wars requires a TRS-80 color computer with 2 joysticks. 16K of memory recommended. From Radio Shack.
All right, our next one is from Kevlin Hinney.
Yeah.
And it's Old is the New.
Do you guys have a chance to watch that video? Probably not, but it's kind of a long one.
Yeah, it's a pretty long one. I watched a little bit of it, though. Interesting speaker.
So it's a cool video. The kind of the gist of his hour-long talk, he goes through kind of some new ideas in computer science and related topics, and says, well, turns out the first time that this idea was mentioned was actually in 1968 at such and such a conference or whatever, and he does that for about a half a dozen different ideas, and then there's a couple that were earlier than that or later, but not that much later. And basically the notion is sort of an everything old is new again. You can probably tell from the title, but I just really enjoyed the talk myself, and I thought it would appeal to some retro heads out there that some of these new ideas maybe aren't so new. Try to put credit back where credit is due, I guess, is sort of the point.
Yeah.
But, anyway, cool.
And we have another entry here from Jim Gary, and it's a game called Gone Fishing. It's another pretty cool one where you get the fishing rod and the hook. As the fish swim by, you have to try to snag the fish. I wish real fishing was as easy and direct as this.
Yeah. Yeah. It kind of reminded me of a toy my kids had a few years back. It's like all these little plastic mechanisms or whatever. They're like fish. They would just open their mouths and close them, and your idea was to put the hook in their mouth while their mouth was open.
Yeah.
And it's kind of reminded me of that.
Yeah.
So, pretty cool.
Very cool. Very colorful. And our next news item is from Richard Lorbieski. Finally, boysandtech.com has some content.
Richard's been in the community a little while. I'm not sure actually how long he's been around, but he's been producing the products for the past year or so. I guess it was people had been giving him a little crap about his lackluster website. So now he's got a marketplace link on his website, and you can download. He's got his CPU socketing services and replacement 6309 CPUs. Of course, he's got his joystick adapters for the Atari-style joysticks to plug into the CoCo over to Tandy 1000.
Our next topic is from Crash Course at YouTube, Computer Science Preview. John, I haven't looked at this except just briefly, but it seems like it's a series of videos discussing computer science.
Yeah, that's pretty much as I looked at it. I'm not sure I can even vouch for the quality, but certainly the quantity. There's a 40 some videos there in the 10 to 15 minute range, and there's bound to be some interesting topics in there for at least some of our listeners. So if you get bored, there's something to go check out on YouTube.
The next one is interesting. It's from Kaylee Rogers at Motherboard. The DIY movement is bringing Radio Shack back from the dead. This is an article that I read a couple of weeks ago about how Radio Shack franchisees are actually thriving in an era where Radio Shack itself has suffered the obvious bankruptcy setbacks that it has. Very interesting. In fact, there was a franchise dealer somewhere up north that was announcing the opening of a second Radio Shack franchise store.
Well, it's kind of cool to think that, one, that our kind of this business that we have a sort of a sympathetic attachment to or whatever, that it might actually survive or in some form or another. It's also interesting to think that, the ones outside of the control of the corporate overlords are the ones doing well. Which might be surprising to some, maybe not so surprising to others, but...
So the next item in the news is from David Murray, a.k.a. the 8-Bit Guy, How a Character LCD Works Part 3.
Yeah.
John, you know anything about this?
Sure. So David Murray's a YouTube celebrity there, the 8-Bit Guy. And he covers a lot of stuff. He's done a couple of CoCo bits. I think he did one where he painted a CoCo, and a lot of people got angry with him or something. But anyway, so he's got this. We've probably all seen these kind of cheap LCD displays that are used in a lot of microcontroller projects and that sort of thing. So he's done 3 parts now. So the first part. Basically kind of wired it up with some switches and showed, using just mechanical switches how to make it work. And then he wired it up. I forget what he did in the second part. Anyway, wired it up some other way, like with a serial port or microcontroller or something. And then maybe it was to a Commodore 64 through the user port. I guess that's what it was. And then this part 3 hooks it up to a Commodore 64 through the whatever they call their cartridge port, which the cartridge port is similar to the CoCo's cartridge port. So anyway, that's what's included here, and I guess this is another one of those. It's not a CoCo project, but it could be. So he kind of goes over some of the basics of what you do to interface that, and I don't know how useful it is to have this sort of LCD port hanging off of your CoCo or your Commodore 64, but it is probably fun for for a lot of people. So I just kind of threw it out there to sort of show it. It's not a difficult project. You could do that on your CoCo, not quite following the exact same steps, but it'd be a similar set of steps. And so, if maybe it emboldens someone to go off and do a project. And if they got a CoCo at hand instead of a Commodore 64, so much the better. So the next item is from, of course, Nick Marentes. Nick's been working on his Gunstar game development blog for a while now. Really, it's Chapter 5, Part 2. Or Let There Be Music Part 2, I guess. It's Chapter 5, follow on to the previous one, where he's working on a music composer. He's named his composing program Game Music Composer, or GMC, which is a little bit on the nose. Well, since it sort of is in the window of opportunity there with my Game Master cartridge, but I assume that he didn't mean to intrude there. Just kind of funny. Maybe it's just the most obvious combination of initials for those things. Who knows?
General Motors is saying the same thing.
General Motors. Yeah, I stole it from General Motors anyway. Exactly. Anyway, so his game music composer is getting a certain level of functionality, and he's explaining some about how he's producing the tones and a little bit of information about programming music, which is similar to what I did in the tech segment last month, actually. So we're kind of treading on the same ground here, so maybe it's not a surprise we'd overwalk some of the same acronyms as well. Nick's a pretty good writer, does some pretty good games. So check out his Chapter 5 Gunstar, the Battle for Earth blog, and enjoy. The next one, articles by Brian Benchoff at Hackaday, and he's kind of one of the regulars at Hackaday. I think he may be one of the higher ups at Hackaday for that matter. But so he's talking about a device that I thought had a different name. He's talking about a device called the OPL2 LPT, which is essentially a parallel port sound card using an OPL2 chip, which was the sound chip that was in the AdLib cards back in the old DOS PC days. It's intended for kind of 486 era or DOS era laptops that didn't have internal slots, but you may still want to play those DOS era games on them, which include sound effects designed for the OPL2 chip. It's kind of a neat idea. You can plug this into the parallel port, what would be your printer port. There are actually the software that will help you patch some of the games so that the games, you play the original games which did not support this hardware. Instead, they were supporting an onboard like AdLib card. But you can fairly easily patch them, and now suddenly they support this stereo port. Or there's also software that if you are running a newer processor that supports the virtual 86 mode, you can actually trap the accesses to one port and redirect them to another. Anyway, so this is a sound card that plugs into a parallel port. And the parallel port is really just a handful of digital outputs. And so if you start with, say, a 6821 PIA and interface it to the cartridge port on the CoCo, you can pretty easily implement a parallel port there. And then you can plug this into it, and you could have that OPL2 sound very easily using this essentially off-the-shelf device. All right, well, moving on. So I'm going to treat these next two as one, essentially. They're both from the same guy, and they're both write-ups comparing. So this guy, David Given, is working on some kind of compiler for, I think, for his own custom pet language or whatever. But he's got versions that target both the 6502 and the Z80. And so when you're targeting a processor with a compiler, you become pretty intimate with the ins and outs of how those processors work. I guess in a moment of frustration here, David produced this blog entry that I know will draw jeers from Commodore and Apple people everywhere, but and even Atari folks. But the title, 6502 Arithmetic and Why It Is Terrible. So he goes into a description of doing some basic arithmetic using the 6502 and certain kinds of operations, including array indexing and that sort of stuff, and about how much code is involved and what a pain in the rear end it is to do some of it. And it's kind of comical. I, of course, enjoyed it as one of the few people I know who, outside of, in the CoCo community, we all acknowledge the beauty of the 6809. a lot of times people outside of the CoCo community either don't acknowledge it or just grudgingly say, yeah, I heard it's nice. But as somebody who mostly did 6809 assembly and then went and tried to port a game to the 6502, was quite frustrated by some of the inadequacies or whatever. It's nice to see somebody else complain. But anyway, I guess he probably got some flack over that. And then not long afterward, he posted another piece doing sort of the same thing, but for the Z80. So Z80 arithmetic, also surprisingly terrible. Now, the Z80, we may all be able to sort of agree with on that one and hold hands with and sing Kumbaya with our 6502 brethren on that one. I think really what they both are about is the fact that when you're doing assembly language on an 8-bit processor, you're going to have certain limitations. Part of the limitations are just inherent to the fact that you've only got 8 bits and your numbers need to be bigger than that. Quite often there's things like handling signs and differently signed numbers, and how do you extend the sign when you go from 8 to 16 bits and that sort of thing. And you have to do it all yourself in assembly language, of course, because it's assembly language. Anyway, he probably had to do some penance for his 6502 friends, and that's why he wrote the Z81. There are some things in here that are a lot less painful on the 6809. There's probably some things that are still going to be similarly painful on the 6809. But it's a pretty good read either way. If you're at all familiar with the assembly language, then take a look and hopefully you'll enjoy. So just one more news item left. One last Jim Gary game because, of course, it's a Jim Gary game. And he's got Gundam versus Doptai ported to the MC-10. I guess this is supposed to be like one of those giant robot fighter machines or something. The graphic looks like it's something carrying a bazooka, shooting at characters on the screen or whatever. It's kind of cool.
It is.
Looks kind of fun. You may want to give it a try. Break out your MC-10. That's our news for this month. So we're going to take another break, and we'll be back with some feedback.
Is your Color Computer 3 keyboard showing its age? Do you have to press keys more than once or harder than usual? Maybe you have keys that don't work at all. What if you could breathe new life into that keyboard? Now you can. Introducing the Cool Touch 3 from Cloud9. The Cool Touch 3 isn't a keyboard replacement, but a complete upgrade kit. Simply remove the metal backplate from your CoCo 3's keyboard, remove the flexible Mylar circuit board, and install the Cool Touch 3. You keep your CoCo's original keycaps, keyboard case, and springs. The Cool Touch 3 is a precision-manufactured, fully mechanical key switch matrix, providing you a superior typing experience. And with an introductory price of just $85, doesn't the most used part of your CoCo deserve an upgrade? The Cool Touch 3 from Cloud9. And coming soon, the Cool Touch 2 for CoCo 2s. Visit Cloud9's website at cloud9tech.com. Cloud9. Cool stuff for your color computer.
All right, feedback. First one actually comes from John Mark Mobley. He actually copied us on an email he sent. The CoCo Crew podcast for the Tandy Color Computer runs ads, but they are delightful. Sometimes they run vintage ads, and sometimes they run funny ads, and sometimes they run mock ads of products from the 80s. It is the creativity of these ads that is so good. So, John Mark Mobley. So, of course, our ads mostly come from Mr. Owen. So, Mr. Owen, praise your creativity on your ad work. Very good. And
thanks,
I'm sure we all agree.
John Mark.
Very exciting, very entertaining. It's definitely a plus for the show. Next item comes from the aforementioned Carlos Camacho, talking about last month's show. This is one thing I really liked. I liked how Myro and Neo read news. It's good to hear them speak more throughout the show and not just play the Ed McMahon. It reminds me more of my favorite vintage podcast, which is out of the UK. So that was the first time last month where we've done the sort of round robin on the news items, and of course we've continued that this month. And I think we all agree that it's a nice way to do it. Spreads things out, gets a little more voices in the show, and I'm less hoarse by the end of the talking, so that's a plus for me too. So very good. All right, one more. This is from L. Curtis Boyle, the secret captain of the Canadian insurgents. Anyway,
He's really Spanish.
Yeah. This says he liked the joke about Neil possibly getting married through his own BBS. And then he says, I actually did meet my now ex-wife at Rainbow Fest in Chicago back in 1988. Cool. All right, well, that's our feedback for this month. So we'll take one more break, and we'll be back with a discussion amongst the hosts.
What's going on, CoCo Cruisers? The original gamer Stevie Stroh here, and I'm the host of CoCo Talk. What is CoCo Talk, you ask? Well, we are a weekly live talk show on YouTube featuring the Tandy Color computer. And guess what? CoCo Talk is now also available as an audio podcast for your listening pleasure. So when you are done listening to the CoCo Crew podcast, come check us out at cocotalk.live for weekly live talk featuring the Tandy Color computer. We'll see you there, CoCo Cruisers.
So you just purchased a TRS-80 Model 1 on the internet?
Yeah, it's going to be great. It was my very first computer.
So did you get a tape player and cassette cable?
No.
How about an expansion interface so you can have more RAM and disk drives?
No.
How about actual 5.25-inch floppy drives?
No.
You're not going to be able to do much with your TRS-80 Model 1.
No, I guess I have a lot more purchases to make on the internet.
It's probably going to take a lot more time and money to gather all of those other components, especially when you can't be sure they'll even work until you receive them.
Yeah.
Don't worry. For about the same price as all of those items, you can purchase the Model 1 system expander from Bartlett Labs.
Yeah?
The M1 SE allows you to boot directly into LDOS and access hard drive images stored on compact flash.
Wow!
It also adds extras like an SVGA port, Ethernet, real-time clock, and joystick port. You can even move software directly from your PC to your TRS-80. You'll be enjoying the entire catalog of TRS-80 software in a flash.
Where can I get one?
Just go to bartlettlabs.com for details and pricing.
Thanks.
Bartlett Labs, making your TRS-80 what it was meant to be.
All right. Well, now we are back. We're going to have a little discussion amongst the hosts, add a little weight to the podcast, hopefully. So we tossed this around and came up with a topic that I think a lot of people will have some input on, or at least may enjoy someone else's input on. I think maybe our first year, or after our first year, about this time, we mentioned what we called CoCo Fest Blues. And then I think some other people almost took it as a challenge that I'm not going to get CoCo Fest Blues, so we're going to just talk about something else. Or whatever. So I don't know if CoCo Fest Blues is the right term anymore, or maybe it's been tainted or whatever. But I know when I was talking in the past, when I talked about having CoCo Fest Blues, I was also sort of talking about, well, it's the summertime and it's nice outside and I don't want to go do something else, or maybe the wife or children or whoever want to go do something else, and it's kind of hard to make any progress on a project where you're sitting behind a 30-year-old computer typing in BASIC or doing something else that can be cast as silly, shall we say. And so the question, I guess, that we're going to throw out to the group here is, how do you stay motivated? How do you make progress? Or do you somehow set things aside and just pick them up later? What do you do to remain happy in your hobby and still deal with the real life through the summertime or or any other time that might be slow?
Well, I could actually use some advice for that, because I'm not going to lie. During the summer months here, I do get distracted from retro projects. I got to stay focused and grounded here.
Yeah,
I think we have such long winters here, and you get to taste that nice weather. You're outside, you're doing other things.
Neil, when do you do most of your CoCo work? During the winter?
Yeah, most of the projects, about 9 months of the year.
That's probably the case for a lot of people, I would imagine.
That's probably why we call it the CoCo Fest Blues, because there's all this activity and all this excitement and then boom, summer starts, and all those projects you've been putting off for the winter around the house, you suddenly can't put off anymore because you've got good weather and 12 hours of daylight. So,
yeah. Well, so you definitely have real life demands that kind of tax your time, and whether it's pushing a lawnmower or painting a fence post or patching a hole in the wall or whatever, it definitely takes some time there. When I get to working on a project, I like to be working on that project. You know what I mean? I like to, like a perfect project afternoon or whatever, a project work session is, you know, I go up after breakfast on a Saturday, and after a while I look up and say, I'm kind of hungry. What time is it? And it says 4 p.m. and then, you know, take care of that and get back to working on some stuff, and then suddenly notice, it's awfully quiet in the house, and you look up and it's midnight. You know, that's kind of a perfect work session for me for project stuff, you know. But reality is, well, I just got done checking my email. I got up, did my morning thing, and took a shower, and sat down and checked my email. And I've got 30 minutes before I've got to get in the car and go take the kids somewhere. And what do you do for 30 minutes, right? And it's like 30 minutes is barely enough time to organize a header file or whatever. So,
Yeah.
what do you do, right? And so, I mean, I think that's one thing that's handy is if you can do it, if you can figure out kind of a short list or list of short projects or project items. You know, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, and it could be I'm going to solder these resistors on these cards I'm making. Maybe you can hold that off and while you're working on something better, and maybe you can stage those up or whatever. It's not, I don't know, it's not very practical for me, but it might be practical for someone else. For me, the hardest thing is, you know, like right now, I mean, I'm overlooking my domain, shall we say, of old computer parts and such, and it's like, told me about tomorrow, I need you to have a computer project done. I'm not even sure which one I would pick up. You know what I mean? So it's kind of nice if you can just sort of have something started, something that's actually going. It's a lot easier to spend 30 minutes working on a project that's already going than it is to put 30 minutes into starting a project. Because I can't start a project in 30 minutes. So it take me 2 hours to get started on the project, whatever it is. It takes me that long to set up the code repository and the make file.
Certainly, there are a lot of distractions for me personally, school, work, other things. So it helps to be able to do what I call bite-sized chunks of work. And sometimes that means sitting down and trying to determine the tractability of a particular project. Is it something you can get done within a reasonable amount of time? Is it something that you can break off into chunks and make meaningful progress? Is it something that you can finish within a period of time that will keep your interest up? That's hard to do because the more distractions you have, the harder it is to finish. And nobody wants to not finish a project. But when you lead a busy life, you have a lot going on. You really have to choose your time wisely. For instance, I'll give an example, the C compiler idea. It'd be great to have it, but that is a huge amount of work, and it takes chunks of time to meet milestones. Now, on that particular project, what's nice is that there's general interest in that, so we have other people working on it. And maybe that's the secret, is find a project that you can be a part of with a larger group of people and then contribute to that in some way, as opposed to trying to take up something too big or too large and then running out of steam before you make any meaningful progress on it.
So I'd say that definitely is a working, a good strategy to follow if you can find it. And I'll generalize it just to anything that involves more than just you. And you'll find when you have a partner or two that their ups and downs aren't necessarily the same as your ups and downs, and sometimes they'll want to do something, and you may not really want to do it, but they're in the middle of doing it, and you say, well, okay, I can help out here and there, and you're not too into it maybe, but you're doing it, and then suddenly doing it, right? You're in the middle of the project again, and it kind of helps keep you going, and it might build you up to your next plateau. And then maybe you're the one that's driving the project, and they're the ones that would otherwise be falling off, but they're doing stuff. I mean,
that's the other problem for me is that, you know, my wife's a teacher, so she's off for July and August. So we usually go away quite a bit. Mm-hmm. So that also does, you know, take away a little retro time as well. CoCo
yeah,
time.
But you know something, Neil, something that I just thought about. The use of emulators is very, very nice to have whenever you're working remotely or away. You can't carry your CoCo with you, obviously, everywhere you go, but that's one convenience of an emulator and cross tools is that you can work on stuff with your laptop outside of being physically next to a CoCo and make some meaningful progress.
That's true. That's a good point.
Yeah, definitely, especially for software development. And, you know, it depends on exactly what you're doing. If you're doing something that's trying to push the hardware in some weird way, the emulator may or may not actually do it right, so you could be wasting your time.
Yeah,
but
true.
but
Right.
for lots of stuff, you're not really pushing the hardware in a weird way. You know, for most things, you have a pretty good idea whether or not the emulator is doing what the hardware does. And so even if you do end up with something that's like, oh, I didn't realize on the hardware that red and that blue kind of clash, but on the emulator they look okay, right? You could have that, but that's pretty easy to account for later when you're on real hardware versus, well, I didn't realize I was missing the scan line and I can't hold the sync on the video when I do it that way. That's a lot different. That you could waste a lot of time developing code and find that problem later. But yeah, using finding ways to be comfortable with the emulators enough to actually do some of your project on them, even if it's not necessarily your preferred platform. You can take your laptop to the beach, and you know, even if you spend a lot of time at the beach, you probably don't spend 24 hours a day at the beach, right? The beach itself. So maybe you get up in the morning and you're watching Good Morning America or whatever, and you can do a little a little basic coding or something while you drink your coffee. And like you say, I think Boys and I both sort of hit the same tone there with keep your projects kind of bite-sized, something you can do and make enough progress to feel like you did something, which is sometimes easier said than done. But if you can keep the projects, if you can organize them in those chunks, then it's a good thing to do. Along those lines, one thing I tend to do when I'm working on a project, especially a code project, because I'm used to working with the text files as source code or whatever, is I'll put a file in the top of my source code directory, and I'll name it something like, it's usually either notes or to do, like TODO or something like that. Mm-hmm. And I'll just slip in little notes there saying, oh yeah, I need to refactor the way this function works, or I need to add something that does that, or I need to change this feature or add this feature or whatever. And I won't work on it then. I'll just leave it kind of to brew. It'll brew in the back of my head, and
yes,
they tend to boil down to be a little more manageable when I come back to them than they were when I put them there.
That is a very, very good point. I do that a lot. It's basically letting it sit on your brain while you do something else, and then you feel motivated to go back once you've thought about it a bit longer.
Yeah, that's definitely something I do too, is take notes, because, yeah, even if you don't have the time to work on it now, you will eventually, and that way you remember it. So, yeah, I mean, for me, it's not really a matter of motivation as much as it's competition for time.
One last thing you could mention for motivation is some people do it for money.
That's true.
Yeah, sure. It keeps people motivated, right?
Profit.
That's right.
Well, I mean, you're talking about to tie that back into the how do you stay motivated. I mean, if you really like, some people do like production phase. It's almost like doing your knitting. You know what I mean? The fingers are always busy doing whatever. And so if you always want to have something to keep your fingers busy, well, find that project that is kind of useful for everyone. And I'll single one now that's this. Well, there's two of them, I guess, or maybe more than two. The SCART cables that are pretty popular right now. Those are useful for lots of people. And I imagine from what I read or what I can just look at, the production is going to be a lot of, cutting wire, stripping wire, soldering resistors in, and, put stuff back together. Sort of a production, heads down, just do your thing. And some people enjoy doing that. And so if that's the kind of thing you enjoy doing, the kind of endless production, shall we say, then find a product that's kind of like that and sell it. And there's always going to be somebody who wants to buy a new video cable. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's true.
there's always going to be somebody who wants to buy some new joystick adapters, I hope. There's always going to be somebody who needs a new CoCo STC or something like that, assuming that eventually there'll be another thing that's a hot new thing. So, anyway, that would be a good way to avoid the the CoCo Fest blues, shall we say, is to have the product that everybody wants to buy. And if you keep your order queue full, then you'll always have something to do with your fingers. All right, well, then I think we'll call that one to a close, and we'll leave you now with a message from our sponsors, and we'll be back with the rest of the show.
The best in America, Radio Shack. Nobody compares to Radio Shack. A name people trust, products they know, a service to count on. There's one place to go. The best in America, Radio Shack. With so much more than just a store. Radio Shack.
Have you ever needed to keep a family budget, estimate interest on your savings account or other investments, predict inflation's effect on your money, or figure interest on a loan? Maybe you sat down with a calculator or pencil and paper in hand, but were discouraged by the amount of time involved or the complexity of the calculations. Spectaculator can make quick work of these and many other problems that come up every day. You just give Spectaculator the figures it needs to work with, tell it what to calculate, and in one step, Spectaculator displays the results you're looking for. Long columns of calculations that took hours to wade through by hand are handled by Spectaculator in a matter of seconds. You can instantly recalculate using new figures and new ways of producing results. Print your information on a line printer or save to disk for future use. Spectaculator requires a TRS-80 color computer equipped with extended basic, disk drive, and disk interface.
So thank you everyone for joining us. They were joined today. We've got Carlos Camacho. Carlos, hello. We've got the familiar voice of L. Curtis Boyle.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, Curtis. Mark Overholzer. Hello, Mark. Let's see. Mike Rowan is there. He's hiding from us.
I'm hiding.
Richard Lorbieski, I'm not seeing his video, but he's on the list there too somewhere.
Yeah, I'm hiding as well. I'm with Mike.
Okay.
The troll's always hiding in the dark. So.
Yeah.
That's right.
And of course, Mr. Steve Stroh, the other Steve Stroh, or the California Steve Stroh. How's that? He's the West Coast version. We probably will be joined by the East Coast Steve Stroh or Stevie Stroh eventually, but he's not here yet. So I appreciate you all joining. Quite often I've had a little roundtable in the November, December time frame for around the holidays. And then we've had a little roundtable discussions preceding CoCo Fest. And I thought, well, maybe we should have these a little more often than that and get a sense of where everyone is and maybe who's working on what or what we think other people ought to be working on or if there's any problems brewing or I don't know, just a general chat it up for a bit. So how do you think things are going? We've got the CoCo Crew podcast has recently completed its third year. CoCo Talk is a bit beyond its first year and still squawking a bit that it's going to spread its wings out to 7 or 8 other shows or something like that. I think things are going pretty well in terms of CoCo Media. The mailing list itself has been not totally quiet, not super active either. I see a lot of stuff on Facebook. We don't have Snapchat.
Discord is where I see the most activity right now.
And Discord does get plenty of activity. I don't see a lot of Snapchat and Instagram, but that's for the kids, I guess.
Yeah.
So I think we're all communicating reasonably well. What do you think? Do we have any communications problems in the community?
Not too much. I think occasionally we get a few, what I would call real trolls, not the funny trolls, happening in Facebook every once in a while. There's been a blow up here or there, but for the most part, it's been pretty good. I think the community itself has been picking up. I mean, the attendance at CoCo Fest was up a fair bit, actually. Hoping that same thing happens with Tandy Assembly, too. And I think there's some new hardware stuff, new software stuff coming out, including some of your own products. So I think there's a general excitement that has definitely picked up over the last couple of years. So I think it's definitely going in the right direction.
So do you think this is sustainable? Do you think we're on a good roll, or are we all rolling on our last fumes? Or
This is the last tailwind, you mean?
Yeah, or whatever.
When will the ride end? Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think short term. I think it's going to keep picking up because, I mean, we're getting more people joining Facebook and stuff. We've got more people joining on Discord. I know just for the ease of use alpha here, I mean, we've got officially, I think, 21 testers now, to the point where I'm probably just going to make the next release a full public release and anybody can grab it and start giving me feedback, also known as complaints. But basically, I think the general attitude of the community is that there's a lot of excitement about a lot of the stuff that's being worked on. I mean, we've been seeing some game screenshots and stuff being done on Facebook. We've been seeing hardware announcements and updates to our existing hardware. Like Brendan just did an update to a bug fix to his CoCo VGA, and at the fest he did the part with the redefinable character sets. So I think there's still enough excitement that at least in the short term, the next couple of years, I think it'll keep going up. I can't predict that further out in the future. If we keep getting more people joining the retro community in general and then finding out about the CoCo, like Steve Strobich has done at the Florida Retro Club, he's actually got a few people who actually have bought CoCos because they've seen what we've been doing as a community as a whole. So if that keeps up, I think it'll keep expanding. Whether it keep up at the same pace, like we jumped up attendance at CoCo Fest, I think about 40-50% from the previous year. I don't know if we'll sustain that kind of growth, but
Yeah, that's we really did have a big bump this year. We'd already had a bump, the previous year, but like I said, it's hard to imagine that we could continue that level of growth. But I mean, even a few percentage points is not bad. And then after having watched it shrunk year after year for a while, I'm just happy to stay even.
Be good to sustain it for sure.
Yeah, I think retro computing in general is actually increasing gradually too. I mean, some of the other podcasts have also mentioned that their numbers are up. So I think as people get into it, and now that we have more disposable income, we can start getting these other machines. Even if you never had a CoCo, you'd go, well, I was always interested in that. Or in our case, it might be I was always interested in Apple II GS or whatever. Sure. So as long as that interest keeps going up here, I think it'll keep growing up until all of us old farts die off, and the young kids won't care. So.
Steve Stroh, I think you're trying to break in there.
I think it's just the opposite. What I observed from seeing the Vintage Computer Festival here in Seattle, the first one in February, was I was astonished at the amount of younger folks, under 30 and even under 20, that showed up and they were fascinated because this is a whole new world. PCs, been there, done that. Even Macs, no fascination for them. But these older computers, they just had no idea that these things even existed. It's like prehistory for them, living prehistory that you can play with. And then to see those big chips that they can actually experiment with and such. I think the CoCo community is going to benefit from the outreach of the Vintage Computer Festival. They've teased that there's going to be, Seattle was the mystery announcement for the new 2018 show, and they've already teased that there's going to be yet another brand new show in sometime later this year or even 2019. So I think the Vintage Computer Festival is doing a lot or Vintage Computer Federation is doing a lot for the retro computing community as a whole, and the CoCo can't but benefit from that.
Yeah, so if they dropped any hints on where they're going with that? The Seattle was kind of a loosely kept secret. They weren't too coy about that one, but I know there's another one in plans, but I don't know. I have no idea where it is.
Nor do I. Just someplace that's underserved, that has a major population center, hopefully with techies.
Now, Steve, from you've actually been to the Vintage Show. I've never been to one of the VCF ones. The younger people that are showing up, are they coming with parents? Like, is that what got them there in the first place, or is it their own interest that's getting them there in the first place, or is it a mixture?
It was a mixture. A lot of the younger kids that couldn't drive, showed up with parents, but they seemed very engaged. They were fascinated by, just the sheer physicality of it. I mean, what's fascinating about a box and a keyboard and a mouse and a monitor? But these things had,
personality.
They'd never seen a CoCo. There were, the multi-pack interfaces, all the peripherals, and was just something new that they hadn't seen. It just wasn't old and tired like PCs are.
Like me.
So do you think that's sustainable, Steve? Do you think that their interest will stay peaked? That's what you're saying?
I think it depends a lot on how available the supply is going to be. If you can, that's one thing that trying to put together a working CoCo system nowadays, will run you, well plus $500 if you want to insist on doing it authentically. But like the CoCo 3 that I wanted to get, it was not going to have a floppy. I would have preferred to stay away from a CRT, and my hands are just incapable of using a keyboard that isn't the classic IBM PS2 layout, so I had to have an adapter on mine. So with those three things out of the way, it was easy. Oh, and of course, flash drive. So yeah, I think it's sustainable. I mean, it's approachable. And I think the big one issue is that the newcomers, we've got 30 years of breadcrumbs all over the web, trying to figure out what's current, where, et cetera. Like, one thing that's really valuable information is to know that CoCos can still be repaired, but you got to know who repairs them. So.
Yeah, that's true. Well, do you think, what am I trying to say? Do you think that we're doing a good job of making repair information or repair services available to the community at large? I know a few people. Richard is one of them. So why don't you talk, Richard? What do you think about that?
What, having a place where, we could probably have a listing like on the Coconut, and I think the more people that are capable of repairing them, the better, because like I always have said is, if we have more people, vendors and people that can support the CoCo, we could be more sustainable, because a lot of the newcomers come in, they see that there's a lot of support, a lot of people that can help out, then I think they would stick around and have the community grow.
Right.
Yeah. And so we send all the returns to Jim Brain, though, right? That's
absolutely, yes.
Open to that.
Well, that's cool. So what do you think overall our hardware situation is for people that want real hardware? Is the supply still good, or are we in danger? Are we driving the prices up with high demand or anything like that?
No, I think that it's doing really good. The joystick adapters and the boomerang boards have done very well, and there's a good demand for them. So, and then there's also a push to push the envelope with you have the 2 meg card, you have that keyboard that Cloud9 came out with, and then Jim Brain's doing an CoCo Mem, an 8 meg card. So there's a lot of good projects that are out there, and people have a lot of and also Ed Snyder's MPI, and then of course the sound cards, and so all the responses have been positive. So I think it's actually very good, and it's very healthy.
I think it helps the community too, because a lot of people back before some of these hardware upgrades were well known and available. You could get a 128K CoCo 3, for example, on eBay fairly cheap, but if you want a 512, that was a pretty rare or expensive item. Now you can get the CoCo 128K for cheap, and you can get a fairly cheap modern-made upgrade. In fact, you can upgrade it now past way beyond what Tandy did in the first place. So, I know CoCo 1 and 2s are, I think, still common enough that their prices aren't really getting driven up on eBay unless they have a custom keyboard or something like that in it. But the CoCo 3 was starting to get expensive, especially if you wanted a higher-end version of the machine. And I think a lot of these hardware vendors are helping that situation, because you don't need to find a 512K on eBay. You can just get a 128K and bump it up yourself.
Yeah.
Of course, the trick still is find the eBay listing where it says powers up but no video, because 9 times out of 10 they're plugging it into a composite output instead of RF.
Right. I got a CoCo 2 months ago. It was like that. It's $40 including shipping, and it doesn't work. It's like, yeah, probably not. Plug it in, RF. Oh, works great.
Yeah. I know Boise has always said that he's never seen a CoCo 3 he couldn't get working. So sometimes it's a matter of reseeding the chips and that sort of stuff. So they're usually a pretty good bet.
Same claim. He says there is no such thing as a unrepairable CoCo.
Yeah.
I think one of the things about the hardware is there were so few CoCo 3s, it sounds like, compared to the CoCo 1s and 2s, which, and like Curtis was saying, the ones that are kind of decked out are much more rare. And then the MPIs, I think it was Ed who said that, Ed or somebody said that there's only like 1 or 2% of the people that bought CoCos bought an MPI.
Yep, that's true.
Most people didn't buy them. So that's why there's so few of them, and that's why there's such a contention point trying to find one. So.
Yeah, then you had to try to find one that was upgraded properly for CoCo 3 if you wanted to run it on that, and yeah.
Yeah. So
the modern hardware that's replacing the old hardware, I think, is a huge boon to the community. I mean, there's RAM upgrades, there's multi-packs, hooking it up to HDMI devices or VGA devices and stuff like that, where you don't have to try to find
the CoCo STC.
Yeah, we don't have to try to find an old working floppy or an old, CRT or whatever.
Yeah, those are my favorite.
$50 CoCo 2, and buy the new stuff, and you got a working system.
Yeah, those are my favorite kind of hardware items. Are the what I call the kind of life support upgrades, where the video adapters or the storage adapters. So I feel like you can plug those in without changing what you're playing with or whatever. Yeah. Some of the other upgrades are cool and fun, and then for the right purpose or whatever, sure. But they kind of change what you're messing with, so you have to develop your own software for them or whatever. It kind of raises a question. Where do you think we're at in terms of software developers in the community? Do we have enough development resources to cover the interest and the kind of the semi-explosion? We've almost got a Cambrian level of explosion here in the hardware. I don't think we really have enough software development resources, but maybe I'm wrong. I'm going to assume that most of you agree and ask you, what do you think we can do about that?
Well, John, as a developer, what did you think about the presentation at CoCo Fest about using containers, for CoCo development? I thought that was a huge, not being a developer, I thought that was a huge breakthrough, that it made CoCo development approachable to practically anyone who wants to learn, because all you need is a PC and pull down the container and go to town without having to even gather up CoCo. And you also don't have to fire up the CoCo and give it space. You can just really pick at it when you get time.
That was Jamie Cho's presentation, and I thought he did a good job with that. And the general concept is kind of cool, especially for people who, maybe have the essential skill set, but not necessarily in a CoCo environment. So maybe somebody who's writing PHP during the day or whatever, but don't quite know how to set up something, especially something that'll bridge the gap between the CoCo and a modern PC. So, if you have someone like Jamie who's set up the container environment and can kind of share the containers are a great way to share a fairly complete environment that can cover all the required tools and other resources. So, I think that's a good step.
And some of the emulators too. I mean, if you declock them from the block clock at 1.78 megahertz, you can kick it up and you can actually do development on stuff like VCC and MAME quite fast too, if you want to use the native tools. Because I know there's two different schools of thought. I mean, Boise and I have discussed this before. I mean, some people want to be able to use all the modern tools and just create CoCo software straight from that. That's fine for a lot of people. There's some people like me and Nick that like to use the old stuff too, because that's what brings the nostalgia back. That's why I'm doing it. If I wanted to use modern tools, I'd just be writing Windows programs. But that's my own personal opinion. So I like the fact that we have that option open to the people that want to develop that way, and all the power to them. I want to try to improve some of the developer tools on the standard hardware itself, just so that if people want to do the true retro thing, they're still going to get an improvement over what was done back in the day.
I think the development issue is the kind of the same as getting started, from cold into the CoCo hobby, is where do you go to find all of the, what utilities are there? Where do you get C compilers, et cetera? So that goes to my point that I've been making for a while, and I'm part of the problem because I haven't done anything about it yet. But I think we really need a kind of a getting started guide for various aspects of the CoCo hobby. You know, where do you go to get blank? You know.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, that's part of the reason we're doing the ease of use project is just from the Nitrous 9 side of things, obviously. But that you get a central image that basically has everything pre-installed, ready to go with instructions. That's the ultimate goal. I mean, I'm a long ways off from having that totally done, but it's gradually getting there, and I think that'll help with that one particular subset of the CoCo culture. But we need stuff like that for Disk Basic and CoCo 1.2 versus CoCo 3, and even if people want to design their own hardware projects, maybe there's some sort of a nice documentation that can kind of merge the technical manuals plus what people have discovered over the years and put it all together in one spot so people can just look up stuff real quick. I mean, there's some hardware manuals and stuff I've seen some people have made that kind of cover third-party peripherals and stuff too, but having a central location with them all easily available that's linkable from Facebook and everywhere else, and then also just having all that documentation done and any disk images with certain things, development tools, etc., whatever way you want to do it, retro or modern, all ready to go, so you can just pick and choose and try them out and see which one you like and go for it.
Do you think?
John, I'd like to ask you a question.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, so one of the things sometimes I've been thinking about is we've got so many games in the CoCo library from all those years, right? And I don't know what percentage, but let's say 95% of them were for the CoCo 1 and 2. Why hasn't anyone really gone back and disassembled a bunch of those games and tweaked them so that, let's say, they use the sound hardware or they use the additional colors for the Color Computer 3? The other day I was looking at the original baseball game for the CoCo, and I thought, wow, that would look so much nice. It's a great game. It plays really well. And if it was to be tweaked to run on a CoCo 3 with all the extra colors, it looks so nice. So I've always wondered, why aren't people doing that?
Yeah, so kind of akin to what you're saying in other communities is what sometimes called a ROM hack.
Right.
And so where people will change the graphics in a game, they make a Mario into Pauline or something like that. And so it's sort of along those same lines. And I have sort of wondered that, and I don't have a definitive answer. I do wonder, for those who've been in the community long enough, I think the arguments over software piracy stayed kind of wicked nasty in the CoCo community longer than the beginnings of some other retro communities at all. In some ways, at least the beginnings of them being retro. And so I wonder if the prevalence of having authors that were still actively defending their copyrights in the community may have discouraged some of that in the early days, and just the fact that it never got established in the early days may be why it still isn't happening now. But I mean, I do think, especially considering how terrible the 6847's color set is, that just right there is a potential source of a fairly easy hack in a lot of games.
Just changing palette registers. We've done that to a few games, like Puyan's had some patches, Lunar Road Patrol's had some patches, just to change the color set. I mean, it's still using the crappy 6847 mode. It just changes, blue to black or something like that.
Right. Well, even like Donut Dilemma, which was done by the author himself, he has the hack in there for there. But you get on the CoCo 3 with Donut Dilemma, you get a little easier to look at set of colors.
Yeah.
But even beyond that, beyond like the obvious of changing the palette registers or whatever, there are a few hacks. I think Curtis did some work with changing audio hardware to using the Orchestra 90 in certain games or so.
Yeah, I did I changed it to use the actual 8-bit samples on the Orc 90.
Yeah. So there's some of that has happened, but not a lot. But yeah, there's a pretty right field, I think, there.
Yeah.
I don't know.
One thing I should ask you guys, you guys are probably more familiar with the other retro communities than I am, but how often do authors of some of those old 30-year-old games on, say, an Apple or Atari Did they ever release the source code after years and years and say, here, guys, play with it? I've got a couple of bits of source code for the CoCo stuff that's actually up on my page, like Donkey Monkey. I think I've got the Pack Dude Monster Maze, which is a CoCo 3 game, so maybe that's a bit of an exception to the rule. But those were actually released by the authors officially, so if anybody wants to download that and start fiddling around with it, go for it. It's commented source code right there. But was that done much in other communities, or does everybody disassemble from scratch?
So Mark probably knows better than I do. I've seen a couple of Apple authors do it, but not an overwhelming number. I have no idea about Commodore or Atari. I don't see you see them occasionally, but I suspect they make them, because of how much news they make when somebody does release something, it sort of suggests that it's not that common.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, most of my projects, Kind Guy, I was just looking for the sound output and just tacked a few bytes in, so that wasn't a big deal. But on some of the other stuff, like my Rescue and Fractus, which I'm optimizing for 6309, I have had to disassemble that, basically in comment and figure out how the whole program works, and I'm still working on that. And Rogue, that's another one I'm doing too. But that's pretty time-consuming stuff. But I can see why, most people, if they want to do an original game, that probably has a bit more zip to them than just taking somebody else's and fixing it up.
That's true. I mean, there's a little more honor or glory or whatever in doing that. But if you are somebody who just wants to dip their toes in the water a bit on some simple hacks, there's a pretty rich group of software out there that, while a lot of it is stuff that did exist on the CoCo, there are some titles that don't seem to have made it, or at least I don't see them. And I'm, of course, talking about the Dragon community. And there's a lot of cool games that came out on cassette in the UK, and I either I haven't seen them on the CoCo, or you just can't find any original software these days anyway on the CoCo. But so there's some cool software over there, and it's essentially the same machine. There are a few distinct hardware differences.
Keyboard mapping being the worst.
But it shouldn't be too hard to account for. Now there's bound to be some PAL versus NTSC concerns in there too, from time to time, depending on your exact game or whatever.
That'd be good for a combo too, because you could patch the keyboard routines if you're looking for certain keys. Because the joysticks, I think, work exactly the same, don't they?
Yep.
So the keyboard's the only thing major you have to change, and then combine that with the CoCo 3 palette switching. You could take some Dragon games that were done in the ugly pastel colors and stuff the VDG does, and fix it up from a Dragon to the CoCo, and then add in some better colors for it while you're at the same time.
That would be pretty cool.
Input on the Dragon joysticks, like a second button or something.
Actually, I think the Dragons are just one button, but the CoCo 2 joysticks CoCo 3 joysticks had two buttons.
There's some difference in the port. There was an extra pin or lack of a
pin. Right, yeah. On the Dragon, it only had a five pin port connector. And it's kind of hard to find those. And what some people have done is they've taken like the CoCo joysticks and they've cut the inside, the second fire button, which is the 6-pin, and they've actually cut it out, which is kind of a waste. You can actually buy an adapter.
Yeah. But I mean, as far as software-wise is concerned, the Dragon's joysticks are completely compatible with the one-button CoCo 1 and 2, as far as I know.
Yes.
It's just the hardware plug-in is slightly different.
Right.
Well, so that probably covers the situation for existing programmers. Could we be building new programmers, or how do we do that? I know Mr. Strobridge has been for a while been working on his basic tutorial videos, and I think maybe he recently
he just started back up again.
Yeah. So that's certainly a good way to bring people in. Do you think people are excited about BASIC these days? Is there some other way to bring people in? Throwing people straight into assembly language seems a little cruel.
There are other practical. Is Python a practical avenue for the CoCo?
I don't.
Being taught.
Somebody would have to do some work. I think there are some ways to use Python on smaller machines, but I don't think anybody's really done the work that it would take to get us there. But
yeah,
I mean,
like
there
that
were some.
IATA project that they're talking about in Discord that I think Brett, the physics guy, has been working on with. I mean, that has a kind of its own display language and stuff too. So once you get that emulator, that terminal emulator running properly, you can run all this other software that's already been written. And then you could write stuff that's actually becomes cross-platform because that'll work on an Atari, that'll work on a Commodore, will work on the CoCo eventually, et cetera. So that's what's one way.
That's true.
And then myself, I mean, go ahead, John.
I was going to say, there are other languages. I mean, there's Logo, there's Pilot, Forth.
Is there a Pascal?
Yep.
There's Pascal for
There's a couple.
09.
There's a disk extended one too.
That's right. Yeah.
I used to have it.
And there's some basic compilers.
Yep. Musachaware.
Do they work?
There's not syntactically 100% compatible, so you have to modify your code to get it to run unless your program is very simple.
Yeah, I know there were some people messing with the basic compilers a few months back. It seemed to have mixed success or less than success.
Unfortunately, there's no CoCo basic compiler that I know of that you could just take your old code, drop it in, and go. You have to modify it.
Only.
I mean, GraphExpress 2 by Jeff Steidel that Sundog put out, a nice graphics package, has some windowing and 4-voice music and stuff you can call from BASIC. Same thing. You have to write all your code specifically for that subroutine library.
Aren't you working on a C compiler, John?
I have something that's a little bit under wraps. I have used it for some utilities or some of the tools I've done. I kind of shelved it for the most part with the CMOC. People were using it and I wanted to encourage participation from somebody new to the community. But yeah, I do hint occasionally that I can only go so far with that forbearance, and it's coming eventually.
I was going to mention CMOC. That's another, yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, actually, I kind of hint in this month's episode that I'm looking a bit at possibly trying to do a compiler that targets the 6801 or 6803 processor, which of course is in the MC10.
Steve York will love you for that.
Yeah, I know. And put Jim Gary out of business. If you can write in C, why would you write in BASIC, right?
I think I saw a interpreter for BrainFuck recently.
Oh, Boise's?
Yeah, Boise did that a while back. I don't know how useful that is, but it's certainly an entertaining thing to if you have your mind for the kind of obscure programming languages.
I know, like myself personally, I was demonstrating before the official call started here just the new GFX2 module, which is for calling graphic routines for Basic 09, which is easier to learn than, say, C or assembly if somebody's just a beginner. But they've added a bunch of features that Kent Myers and Kevin Darling did back when they were doing the level 2 upgrade, and they released part of it publicly for the old version. That added a bunch of stuff to support multi-view easily in Basic 09. And that had, for some reason, never got ported to Nitrous 9. I didn't do it back in the day, and everybody else didn't do it either. We were still running the stock Tandy one for the last 30 years. So I actually just finished disassembling it and updating it. I added some more features that we've added to the OS since then. And that'll be released on the next version of the ease of use. So Basic 09 programs can create, pull down menus and scroll bars and all that stuff very easily. So I'm hoping that'll encourage some people that want to try to learn Basic 09. Now they can actually create a full GUI-based program without having to learn system calls and display codes and everything else. So hopefully that'll encourage some.
That'd be cool. So what about was it Dave Phillipson was talking recently about using OS 9 as a development platform for Disk Extended Color Basic?
Yep.
Is that practical?
Yeah, I'm trying to find, if you guys have a copy of it, send it to me, because Alan DeCock, way back in the tune-up days, and original Nitrous 9 was a commercial product, came up with a little program called Rusty. And the purpose of Rusty was to launch disk extended programs from your hard drive or whatever under Nitrous 9 and then just kick it into the disk-based environment and run it. Which means you can do development on Nitrous 9. You type Rusty, your command, and it would just load it up and run it as if you just booted it off a floppy right in Disk Basic. And it worked great because you could have a huge library on a hard drive of all these. I didn't do multi-load ones. That was one thing it didn't do. You had to do one massive bin file type thing. But it would just launch them quickly off the hard drive. But you could do your assembly and everything else there too. And I cannot find my copy of it because my original hard drive crashed a while ago and I can't find it. So if any of you guys have it, I know it was out and floating around for a while. So Rusty is the name of the program.
Yeah, that's something cool to look for then.
Yeah, because once I find it, that'll be on the ease of use too. Because then we'll make an RS-DOS directory for any one-shot CoCo 1 and 2 games or CoCo 3 games that are a single bin file load without any, special wacky tricks on it. Depending on disk basic being there, that you can just load it up. It'll fire it up, kick it back into the regular disk extended mode, and run your program.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
I mean, even get it so you can launch it from multi-view. Just double-click on it, and it'll fire up a DOS game.
You had a series on making a ROM cartridge to boot a basic program, and I thought that was really brilliant, and I can't wait to dive more into that. How about the feasibility to put like OS 9? This might sound stupid, but like OS 9 on a ROM pack and have that automatically load, and then have it automatically load a program that's on the ROM pack that is OS 9 program.
You can
so, yeah, definitely something you could do. Boise had gone through the process. He used to have it documented somewhere on the web.
Yeah, it's called the project.
Well, that was part of it, I think. I think that was the inspiration for why he did it in the first place, at least. I think he used to actually sell it as a Cloud9 product, but I'm not sure where the status of that is now. But I have taken that and booted OS 9 out of ROM on an emulator, and it should be not that big a deal. OS 9 sort of or Nitrous 9 is sort of intended or aware of that kind of memory architecture, shall we say. It scans all the memory looking for modules and puts them in the module directory and can run them. And if your Cisco module or whatever it's called specifies a certain program to run, that's what it'll run. So you could boot straight into whatever else is on the program pack. The real problem becomes stuffing it all into something small enough to fit in the cartridge.
Yeah, and then having to do updates after.
Yeah, that too.
But yeah, Microware originally designed OS 9 to be ROMable. If you actually look at their old ads, they actually say right flat out. And you don't need 64K then either. You can run it in a 24K machine or something. Because, the ROM will handle the main system modules and the RAM is just for running your user programs.
Mm-hmm. So going back to the state of the CoCo, in terms of hardware, what is the hardware that we don't have on our platform that we look at other platforms and say, wow, I wish we had that. For me, it's always been some platforms they've made cases or they've made replaceable keyboards. For me, like keyboards are the toughest thing for me to get a hold of. So what do you guys think?
Yeah, well, we have the beginnings of the keyboards now with Mark Marlette. Yeah, so we have at least the beginnings of that. He's not selling whole keyboards at this point, but there's something there. I don't know.
And there's AT keyboard adapters too, though. I mean, the compatibility may not be 100% in all cases.
Yeah, I'm working on a keyboard adapter right now, but again, I'm just dabbling in it, so I don't really have any release time frame on that right now.
Is Mark still selling his? Because he had one he was selling for a while there too.
I think so.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm not sure what else. There's like maybe a micro SD card versus a full SD. It's not really it's more of a distinction without a difference, I guess. But
other than that, it'd be like sound cards, which yourself and others are all doing. If we could do some sort of a sprite card or something that could aid the graphics and speed that up.
Yeah.
And then some of the accelerator boards. The 65 816s or whatever the name of the chip is. You can bump it up to 20 megahertz or something like that. We don't have anything like that. I think the closest we have is a 609. So.
Yeah.
Probably the best way to go with that.
Is there a place you can reliably get the CoCo SDC?
Yep, just
because it seems like it's a batch process, and I haven't quite sussed out where to get one.
Just email Ed Snyder, and he'll get you on the next run whenever that happens, which is fairly often. He's selling quite a few.
That brings up another point. One thing that, to my observation is the CoCo doesn't have a reliable kind of a single source to get a bunch, to go shopping when you need it. you have to be in the know enough to get on the project list, to be notified, and then you got to jump on it then, and then it's gone.
Yeah.
Some of the other communities are bigger, and so they can support a full-time, availability.
Some of them, I mean, a lot of them have the same kind of issue, depending on their size or whatever. I mean, like the Commodore, of course, the Commodore people have Jim Brain. Wait, we have him too. Wait.
One of the things I've done or tried to do, I understand what Steve is saying, is because I've tried to order stuff from some of the other people, and even like me in the beginning, they'd have to email, and then you email back, and then you have to do a PayPal back and forth, and sometimes you can get lost in the translation. And I've set up my site, and I'm going to be adding more stuff really soon, to where you can order it right then and there. If I have it in stock, it'll be in stock, and then it can be immediately shipped, and it'll have all the tracking, and it'll be all automated. So, and I know that Jim Brain has his his store set up that way as too.
Yes, it's the e-commerce and regular availability parts that I think are sort of generally missing. So that'll be a nice addition to the community.
Yep. I'm actually working towards that as one of my projects. That's what I do for a living. I'm an e-commerce manager. So ultimately, the Color Computer Store will have hopefully products by other people, and they'll be able to place back, orders that are in stock, and we'll show you the inventory as well as place back orders. So those orders will go over to the developer. So we can eliminate all these email chains.
And it'll make it easier for the vendors to actually they don't have to worry about setting up e-commerce and PayPal and Apple Pay and
they'll
Android Pay
understand what the demand is, rather than, I'm in, put me down for two.
Right.
Yeah, because a lot of times when people have said, set me up, or, send me, put me on the list, and then you contact them, of course, then all of a sudden, I don't need it. But the other hurdle that I finally overcame mine is calculating shipping costs. The program I'm using now, and it also being cheap and inexpensive, without breaking the budget. But yeah, mine's set up to where you can buy stuff, and it'll, no matter where you live, it'll automatically calculate the shipping, because that is a big hurdle,
especially international.
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't know that there's any other community that does this, but one thing I think would be really valuable is some kind of dedicated community for, essentially an eBay dedicated for the CoCo community. That if you've got extra pieces, you can put them there, and it's kind of a friendly community thing instead of the cutthroat, way of doing business on eBay.
Yeah, eBay bothers some folks for a variety of reasons, and like you said, a lot of us wouldn't mind taking a little less if we knew the items were staying kind of in the club or whatever.
Totally agree.
Yeah, not being flipped or anything like that. But I think Ron DeVoe has a CoCo marketplace on Facebook, if I'm not mistaken. I'd have to look again.
Yeah, I think I saw that.
Post stuff up.
Carlos, given that you've got an existing storefront, if I had stuff that I wanted to get rid of, and once I made the decision that I want to get rid of it, price, how much I get for it is less. It is kind of irrelevant, and I just like to see it go to a good place instead of taking it to the local PC recycling. So if you had like a what's the word? Oh, consignment, page.
Yeah. That's what we're hoping to do, is not just have new products, but the ability for folks in the community to post products on there.
There you go. Good job.
Yeah. Sounds like you've got a market supporter already there, Carlos. So sounds like a cool idea. All right. Well, who else has got a topic? I think I saw Steve Strawbridge sneak in the back door. Are you there with us, Steve?
Back door at your service.
That was creepy.
Yeah, I don't know if you caught any of the show. What do you think so far?
I was listening to the part where you talked about software, and then I don't know if you've switched topics or if you've come to a conclusion, but I would like to add 2 cents there.
Oh, sure, that'd be great. We were just we were just saying that maybe we should build more programmers, and you had your basic series to that end, and is that good? And are there other things we can do? So why don't you fill in from there?
I would like to see more developers as well, because as you guys were mentioning, we're getting a little top heavy in hardware, and we already have almost, like a sound identity crisis. So many products, not enough developers. My series in BASIC that I've been dragging on for 2.5 years, I've now made a commitment. I'm going to finish that this month in June. I've got, half a dozen chapters left. That will be a service to someone. I don't know that that's going to guarantee any products, but it's at least one resource. The next series that I wanted to start, and we've got a lot of people on board to help with moral support, is we're going to start a series in assembly. And it was Saturday night. We did it after dark, and Steve Bjork already started giving us some very basics on assembly. And he's going to probably want to do like a 10-minute segment on CoCo Talk, and I'm going to start a series based on the William Barden book. And hopefully we'll have a panel of experts all chime in with some value-added stuff, because I can add no value to a language I'm learning myself. So the plan is to start that assembly series this calendar year. And because I know I'm not the only one who says I wish I learned it when I was a kid, and so I know I'm expecting that there should be a good interest in this series. While I am not an expert, I am going to be the everyman who doesn't know it, who's going to learn it, so we can hopefully all take this journey together. So that's on the plate, it's on the horizon, and I'm hoping that will maybe help. As much as I hope there is more, I also don't want to brush over the fact that we need to be grateful for who we have.
Right. Now, what if you could go back in time and force everyone to learn assembly language? Sorry, just a little nudge.
All the modern programs would run so much better.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Oh, Lord.
John, back in the early 90s, I was involved with Macintosh, and it was really dark days in the Mac platform, because none of the major game companies were supporting the Macs. We were, once in a while we'd get a port. So it was pretty dismal. There was not a lot of information for Mac developers. So I launched a website for Mac developers, and it turned out to be a pretty big community. And I ran that for about 10 years. But the highlight of that community is that I launched a game program or game development contest. And it got to 1 year we were giving away about $20,000 worth of prizes. And most of the prizes were hardware, software, and so it's kind of a win-win for everyone, because the winners, obviously, they got really cool software and hardware that they could use for further development. They also released all their source code so that people who wanted to learn game development would have a bunch of source code to look at. And then obviously the game players in Mac game players got a bunch of new cool games. So it'd be really interesting if a group like the CoCo crew could help to foster such an annual contest, where I'm sure a lot of the guys who are making hardware, they would donate like an SD card or sound card or like that, to really spice it up.
We probably could put something like that together. I actually had kind of a crazy idea recently that we've got the CoCo, and we've got the Dragon, and we've got the MC10, and they all run a similar version of BASIC. Maybe we should have some sort of color BASIC contest and pit the MC10 against the Dragon, against the CoCo, and against the CP400. That would be fun, although I don't know, BASIC, BASIC can be an entertaining platform. Somebody will say, well, it's got to be assembly language to be a good game. Well, maybe not. Maybe we could have some rules that accept assembly enhanced BASIC or something like that. I think that's a pretty good idea. Many people probably know I've kind of sort of sponsor a similar contest. I don't think I've done a great job of it the past year or so, but if I could keep my mind focused on something, or at least schedule it at a time that doesn't have so many demands on me, maybe that would go better too. Or I could just force Mike to be the president of it, and he could run it when I'm not looking.
Ira's got nothing to do.
Yeah.
I fell for that once, John.
She's doing a really good job. It's amazing how well you've managed to flounder in the mud there. No. Well, I had to knock you down twice. Oh, man. Oh, well, so what have we missed? What else? Would you say the state of the CoCo is strong? I always hate that in the State of the Union speeches. It always sounds funny to me when you say the State of the Union is strong. It just sounds like bad English to me, But
I would say it's stronger than it has been.
Well, I'd say we're doing pretty well. There are communities that are doing less well. Say, I don't know, the Commodore 16 community, maybe. I don't know. The Aquarius community. We'll poke fun at Carlos there with that.
Maybe the Atom community.
Yeah. There you go.
Well, let me ask you a question. We have a lot of awesome channels now for people to stumble upon and listen and watch and participate in the CoCo community. But do you think that we do enough to actually interact in communities outside the CoCo world? For example, on Atari Age or the Vintage Computer Federation, where we could snap up potential new users there?
Probably not, would be my guess. There's a Tandy channel or a Tandy forum or whatever on Atari Age that gets a certain amount of activity. I think James Divendaffer is fairly active there. I think there's some Tandy forums related to the VC Fed stuff, but I just don't really use them. I don't know much about them.
I visit occasionally.
But yeah, it would probably, especially for people that are kind of forum fans, shall we say, to spread out to those existing forums and spread the good word. Then that'd probably be a good thing to do. And like you say, you bring in some of those folks are just, they're kind of misguided in their choice of computers, but they're pretty smart folks. I mean, they're kind of almost like Jim Brain, right?
Yeah, it's like an education problem.
So, yeah. But no, I mean, I definitely think it's, especially as we all get a little older and a little grayer, it's more the merrier kind of thing. At some point, we're all going to have to go to the one big event all together anyway, because nobody will be able to sustain an event by themselves eventually. We just hope it'll be called Tandy Assembly.
I'm just wondering if there isn't some value in kind of forming a small subgroup of the CoCo community that makes a commitment to try and show up at the regional VCFs, Vintage Computer Festivals, to show the flag for the CoCo.
That would be good.
Obviously, you can't get to them all. They've got enough of them now around the country. It would be tough, but if the group was cohesive enough to have common materials and send the what's it called, the table banner around, and
yeah, that's true. Yeah, so I've exhibited at VCF East a couple of times, and I've been to Southeast 2 or 3 times. I've been there 3 or 4 times and exhibited 2 or 3 times. I know Mike has been to the Midwest a couple of times. I went there with him once. The Midwest usually has some of the Glenside crew there anyway, flying the CoCo flag. Tim Lindner, I think, has participated in VCF East from time to time. But all of that, none of it's really coordinated, I think, is kind of the point you're making.
Right.
And maybe that would be something that we could Maybe we need to set up a CoCo Federation, a neutral banner between Glenside and the CoCo crew and CoCo Talk and whatever other subgroups exist out there. Roger Taylor and his CoCo TV channel, and
there is some tiptoeing to be done between the various factions. They're friendly, but there's definite boundaries that you end up figuring out eventually.
Yeah.
But having a consistent message between the various VCFs, like you said, right now it's kind of haphazard where, somebody might want to demonstrate games at one, and then somebody else might want to demonstrate OS9 another, and somebody might want to demonstrate some hardware projects. If we can get something that's semi-consistent so that people from all over the country are seeing all of this stuff at once, like we can help if the person's not familiar with certain parts of the community efforts, that they can get some help from some of the rest of us, and then they can actually give a nice consistent message showing all the benefits of the CoCo.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a good idea. I want to try and show the CoCo flag at the 2019 Seattle Vintage Computer Festival, and
Makes sense.
they've been very quiet about the 2019 event. They total radio silenced so far, but they did say that the venue had committed to a 2019 event. They just didn't say.
So, for example, in that case, I could send you the ease of use image, whatever version we're on at that point. Just send it to you and any special instructions if you need any, and then that could be part of your presentation.
Yeah, and I would be able to say this is the hardware I'm going to bring, and any there was that I've heard of, I have not seen personally, the demo program that somebody put together that really showed off the graphics capabilities of the CoCo. That would be fun to run. That sort of thing.
Simon. We just need to collect our pretty faces, the Steve Strobridges and the Simon Jonasons and all the other booth babes that we've got. And
there are people that like this idea of showing up at the vintage computer festivals around the country and want to try to bring something together. I'd be happy to act as a nucleus. Email address is steve.stroh@gmail.com. That's steve.stroh@gmail.com. And I just would love to see more people even knowing that the CoCo is still out there. It was news to me. As in February 2018, when I went to the Vintage Computer Festival, I did not know anything about the existence of the CoCo community. It was a total gobsmack to me when I discovered the CoCo VGA and started chatting him up, and he said, "Oh yeah, there's a lot of people doing this."
What I think is really cool is thinking outside the box and going beyond the vintage computer festivals and going to these, let's say, a programming competition. And I think, John, I want to say it's on your podcast, you featured someone who went to a programming competition for like 3 days.
Joel Levy,
and showing a retro computer there where you least expect it, and showing that to young people, that just blows their mind. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, that is a good thing, and that is something we could encourage people to do. And when they have them in their areas, they can participate, that sort of thing. Along the same lines, a lot of areas have the mini maker fairs or other kind of creative sort of events, science, STEM-related events.
The better fit to me is the gaming, vintage gaming. That seems to be getting a huge amount of traction. There was just a big one in Portland or Seattle this couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, Portland has a big event every year. I don't think that was the big one recently, but I could be wrong. And then there's the Atlanta had one recently, the Southern Fried Game Exchange. Is that what it's called? I think it's SFGE. But yeah, there's some cool gaming events around. There's even the smaller ones like that CorishCon that was in Ohio a couple of weeks back. But it's good to get people out there to fly the flag and, like you say, promote the media outlets and CoCo Talk, CoCo Crew, the Facebook groups and the email lists and just whatever whatever you're using and whatever you express interest in, definitely a good thing to promote it.
Agreed.
If I could just take 2 seconds to share my plan for VCF Midwest this year.
All right.
So again, this is the plan and this is the intent, but I'm hoping to be at VCF Midwest. We're hoping to have a table next to Jim Brain. So Grant Leedy and myself will be there. Jim Brain from Retro Innovations will be there. So we're going to try to fly the CoCo flag just by being there. But my exhibit is going to be showing off my original Cosmic Aliens on a Tandy 1000. So I'll have the original game playing on the original hardware. And I'm hoping to have a playable demo of my CoCo version there as well that I'll probably just do on a laptop or emulator, so I don't have to bring a whole other CoCo setup. But I'm hoping to show the original version and the current CoCo project, what it's like running in CoCo Basic. And assuming I make it, I've also thrown my name in the hat to give a speaker slot if they have any openings left. I said this is low priority, but if I get a speaker slot, then I will do a little thing that's going to talk about, you know, my experience with the color computer community and how we do have the CoCo Crew podcast that's been running for 3 years and how we've been having this talk show for a year. So I am going to try to make a splash and wave the CoCo flag while I'm there and show off just some examples of what's going on in the community. All tentatively planned and will hopefully, you know, come to fruition.
Cool. Well, good luck with that. I think that'll be cool. And like I say, take advantage if you enjoy the notion of strangers walking up to you to talk to you about your strange hobby, which if that doesn't sell it for you, nothing will. Do go out to these events, and you know, like you say, there's the maker events, and there's the vintage computing events, and the gaming events, and it's not hard to get a table usually. And if you have a table, at least it gives you a place to sit during the intermissions of whatever else is going on. Sometimes you have a table that you end up missing everything else going on. So it depends on the event. Hopefully that won't happen to you. But yeah, get out there and like you say, fly the flag. And yeah, I don't know. It's like there's a guy there's a guy locally that started a local makerspace, and he likes to talk about how he went to a Maker Faire event out in California. He got so excited. He found out there was a mini event, shall we say, near here in Raleigh. So he went to the Raleigh event and he put up a little sign that said, if you live near Burlington and you're interested in this, then introduce yourself. And so I was walking past and I saw it and said, well, hi, I'm John. I live near Burlington. And so he and I and a couple other people started meeting, and eventually it took a couple of years, but eventually it got to Makerspace formed, and they produced their own mini Maker Faire event for the last 7 years. And I guess my point being is you get out there and fly your freak flag, and other freaks will flock to your banner, and sometimes good things happen from it. Yep. So anyway, well, does that wrap this up? Is there anything else we should cover or talk about? Or
one other thing I wanted to mention, we've been talking about new hardware projects, new software projects, stuff like that. One thing I wanted to point out is Bruce, kind of breaking out of the box here with doing this, retro radio show type thing with alternate history. That was quite a unique, innovative thing to come up with, I think. I don't think any other retro communities have attempted to do anything like a radio play.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a unique thing, and that follows on the heels of his unique software release.
Where you buy the book and you get the software for free type thing.
Exactly. So, Bruce definitely. Yeah, that would be kind of cool too.
CoCo on Broadway.
So Bruce is definitely the out-of-box thinker, I should say, and it's probably the cold weather if they're in Canada or something. But,
not these days, but sure.
But yeah,
other retro communities have such a community like the CoCo community.
Yeah, I think we are kind of lucky, kind of blessed to have a strong and diverse in a diverse ideas kind of way. Maybe not so diverse in a facing the crowd sort of way, but we should work on that too. But Anyway, so this is supposed to be the state of the CoCo community for June of 2018. I'd say we're doing pretty well. We're communicating. We're putting out media for other people to consume that hopefully can find us if they just remember the CoCo and go looking. We're promoting software development. We seem to be succeeding at getting hardware development, whether we're promoting it or not. I think we're all buying some of it anyway. But I think things are looking pretty good. All right, well, so Steve Strobridge, Steve Stroh, Carlos Camacho, Mark Overholzer, Curtis Boyle, who else? Mike Rowan, Richard Lorbieski. I think that's everyone. Thanks all for joining and for participating, making this a better show.
Please welcome to the stage the IT comic, Mr. Gene Bryansford.
Thank you. How are you all doing tonight?
Yeah.
My brain has way too many tabs open right now. My girlfriend has a hard time communicating with me. We were at the park looking up at the sky, and she asked me to describe what I saw in the clouds. And I said, the clouds are just someone else's computer. Yeah, so she asked me for my home address, and I said 127.0.0.1. All I could see was the error 404 in her eyes.
You suck.
I could tell she was getting mad at me. Then she asks me, why are you in this relationship? And I said, I'm only here because the server's down. Besides, I asked you to read all the terms and conditions, and you clicked agree.
You suck. Terrible, man.
Then she started using all caps and special symbols. So I said, babe, I'm not antisocial. I'm just not user-friendly.
Get off the stage. You're terrible.
I used to be in the IT department at Springfield Hospital, or as we referred to it, SHIT.
That's how I refer to your act.
You know, there's only two kinds of people in the world, those who know binary and those who don't.
It's 10, you doofus.
Who's a great programmer and has two thumbs? Not me, because I had a little incident with the circular saw last weekend.
This week, the CoCo Crew podcast is brought to you by Gimme Crisp Cereal. Most any cereal is fine with me, as long as you spell it G-I-M-E. Magenta, red, buff, yellow, and green. Keeps your mind sharp and your body lean.
Start your day right with a delicious bowl of Gimme Crisp cereal. Crispy oat O's with colors of the Tandy Color Computer. Served with milk and juice, it's part of a complete breakfast, and moms love its 3 vitamins and herbs. And for a limited time, you can get 1 of 5 Color Computer program packs free. Just send $3 handling and 5 box tops from specially marked boxes of Gimme Crisp. Choose from Clowns and Balloons, Atom, Bingo Math, Color Backgammon, and Dino Wars.
Magenta, red, buff, yellow, and green. Keeps your mind sharp and your body lean. Gimme Crisp.
Welcome, everyone, to the tech segment for episode 37 of the CoCo Crew podcast. As usual, I am John Linville hosting. This time, I thought it would be fun. There's been a lot of talk in the community lately about people learning to program, especially people learning to program assembly. And, maybe not that much more than usual. Maybe it is. I'm not sure. Maybe it's just the people around me. Anyway, it's a cool topic. It's one of the cool things to do that a lot of people as kids thought was impossible, and then when they try as adults have found out not so impossible, and in fact rather empowering for those who want to write code for an older computer. And sometimes it's empowering even for people that are programmers, but just have always thought, assembly language is just a step too far. And it's really not. With that, I thought it might be fun to talk a little bit about how to kind of use BASIC as a stepping stone or as a stepping off point and be able to integrate some assembly language code with your BASIC programs. Maybe it makes things a little less daunting. As I say, assembly language can be pretty daunting for people. The syntax is definitely different. It's a lot less human-oriented than, say, BASIC or some other modern programming language. It's actually very human-oriented compared to what's sometimes called machine language. It's actually letters with some, there are abbreviations at least for some human ideas, rather than just being pure numbers. But it's still the syntax is unfamiliar, a little unfriendly, and then the operations that you can conduct with the instructions are simple and pretty low level. And the fact is that once you're down at the assembly language level of programming, depending on what sort of system you're working in, you don't get a lot of help. And so even simple I/O operations, like for interacting with a user to play, even a word game or something, can be kind of difficult and cumbersome, even for fairly simple hardware devices like, say, a UART for a serial port is, which we don't even have on the CoCo, but if you have the deluxe RS-232 pack, you could use that, and the UART is pretty simple to program, but still not quite as simple as maybe using BASIC. If you kind of decide to use BASIC as sort of a platform, you can provide some stepping stones to make things a little easier. You can use BASIC kind of similarly to how shell scripts are used on, on pretty much any system, but certainly on Unix systems, where you have a scripting language that can kind of tie things together, and then you have, you execute actual physical commands on the Unix system. It's a different style of system, and so instead of executing different commands, you'll be executing your own assembly programs loaded into memory or whatever. But that little combination can make things a little easier, and so it can allow you to concentrate on writing just the pieces in assembly that you need to or want to learn how to do without having to do everything else. Like I said, the BASIC can kind of glue stuff together, provides looping constructs and that sort of thing. And it can even do, some of your user experience sort of things. It can handle text I/O, and it can put graphics on the screen, not particularly fast, but it can do it for you. So I guess I would encourage you, if you're just getting started in assembly language, and you can use BASIC to kind of ease your pain a little bit and take care of some of the heavy lifting while you're still learning the basics, literally the basics of doing the assembly language. Okay, now, so those of your long-term listeners to programs know that I've at one time made an assertion that seems to have irritated at least a few people. The few people that really irritated seem to really have been irritated by it. And that's on the difference of, it really was about the importance of learning, what we call machine language, and that's, the numbers that for the instructions, rather versus assembly language, which is the kind of the human readable versions of the instructions. And whether or not it's important to learn the machine language stuff. And so I know this is going to come up here a bit, at least in some people's minds. But so again, I assert that even if you think you've learned machine language and all you've really learned is the encoding of whatever the real language is that has two names, it's a language with two names. One's machine language, one's assembly language, but really it's the same language. Whether you call something a 4F or a clear A, you're still thinking about the same operation. You're still doing the same task. So all you've really done is just saved yourself the cost of an assembler. And maybe back in the day that was important when the assembler cost you, $100. Nowadays assemblers are free. So you're not really saving yourself much, maybe a little time for having to run the assembler. If you really want to be pedantic about it, the techniques described here are really about interfacing machine language to basic programs in terms of poking numbers into memory and executing them or whatever. Now, you're probably still going to use an assembler to produce that machine language, but if for some reason you're not, well, that's good for you. I hope you enjoy yourself. So, again, we're really talking about machine language. I'm still going to call it assembly language because I'm kind of a stubborn mule like that. Just a side note for Dragon users, there is a cartridge called DASM. It's kind of a dual cartridge, DASM and Demon. I think Demon may have been the debugger or something for the DASM assembler. But the DASM assembler is interesting because it actually uses the basic editor and actually could put your assembly language source code kind of right in line with your basic code. That's really neat. I wish I could cover that. I may have mentioned in the past, I do have a copy. it's a neat idea. It's something for somebody to remind me about and ask me about later, but really it's neither here nor there right now. So, okay, well, I'm going to get on with that. So, how to coexist with BASIC, or how to get along between your machine language or assembly language code and BASIC itself. So, kind of the first thing you need to figure out to do is how to share memory. So how do you share memory with BASIC? So you need somewhere for your code to live. That's really the biggest thing. And beyond that, if you do need access to blocks of data or whatever for your assembly language code, it needs to you need to have it not taken away by BASIC for loading extra code or variables or whatever. So you need to sort of protect it. And the first thing you need to do is kind of figure out what memory is available. And so you can do that by referring to some of the memory maps that are available. I think there's one on page 254 of the Getting Started with Extended Color BASIC, which is the combined manual that came with the CoCo 3s, I guess. There's also a memory map on pages 170 through 172 of the Color Computer Disk System Owner's Manual and Programming Guide. The funny thing about these manuals, a lot of them they're not real specific on some of the numbers about where things start and end, or whatever, because it turns out some of the commands that you might use in your basic program kind of can move things around. And so, for example, there's graphics pages. I think when you turn the machine on, it reserves 4 graphics pages. There may only be 2. Anyway, I think it's 4, but there could be up to 8, depending on what pclear command you've given. There's if you're using the disk system, there's a files command that can specify how many file buffers are available. If you've ever seen people use the command clear with just 1 parameter, or even with 2 parameters, but the first parameter of clear is about how much string space you're allocating. The more string space you allocate for BASIC, the less room there is for anything else. Those all kind of affect where things start mostly in BASIC. So the different values you have there might take up more memory, leaving less room for the rest of your program, which depending on what size program you're building may or may not be important. But then you can also see that there's like the end blocks of these various things, including the one that butts up against the top of or the beginning of ROM, which would normally be right at the top of your basic program. Well, your basic program followed by strings. Once you figure out where you're going to put your machine language program, you can use, for example, the clear command, and the second parameter will specify the highest address that BASIC will use. And so, if you specify, 15,000 or something, then say if you have a 16K machine, I guess that'll basically stay to BASIC. Okay, you can't write beyond 15,000. So back off of that, the amount of space that you want to save for strings, and which would be the first parameter to the clear command. And then that becomes where you can start allocating variables, if I recall. Anyway, I'm not looking at the memory map right now, but point being, you kind of need to understand a little bit about how BASIC uses memory. You can also, say if you have a program that's not going to use a lot of graphics, or maybe no graphics at all, you can just put your machine language routines in one of the graphics pages that you can reserve with the pclear command. You need to figure out how those are used. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here on that, but once you've figured out where you're going to tuck your machine language code, then you need to kind of feed that information back to the assembler with usually with an org statement. Although if you're writing position independent assembly code, then it doesn't matter a lot as long as you don't go over the amount of size of you've reserved for yourself. Anyway, but that's sort of the first step. I would recommend, for the most part, is you figure out roughly how big your machine language program is going to be, and then you use the clear command to save the space between save that amount of space at the top of memory So put your machine language program right after your basic program, and then butt it up against the start of the ROMs at hex 8000. So, you'd probably be, somewhere in the, say, 7000 range or something for your org statement. Whatever. Depends on exactly what you do. So, again, I'm just sort of highlighting things. You'll have to learn the rest for yourself. And so anyway, that's sort of your first step. Figure out where your program goes. The next thing you need to do is, of course, get your program to go there. One thing I think many of us have seen over the years with example programs, type-in programs from the Rainbow or whatever, sort of a pattern that many of us have seen where you have a loop, a for loop. Inside the for loop, there'll be a read statement and then a poke statement, of course, followed by a next. So it'll be a for, read, poke, next, for, read, poke, next for some length. And somewhere in the program, there'll be data statements, and the data statements will just have integer numbers in them. Well, those integer numbers actually correspond to the actual values of the operation codes or other data that's part of your assembly language program. That little idiomatic style of program, some assemblers can actually generate that for you. I think LWSM can. Pretty sure I've seen at least one other that can do it. I'm pretty sure there's tools in the community that can also generate those programs from a binary. They're not too hard to write a tool to do that. In fact, I have one somewhere if you really need one. So that's kind of the most sort of, shall we say, canonical way of loading your code, your assembly language program that runs along with BASIC, is to do it from inside your BASIC program with one of those loops. Now, the other thing you can do is you can also just generate a bin file and put it on your disk alongside your BASIC program, and you can just load it. And the bin file will have to have the start or the load address that matches what you are using with your clear command or whatever. And that's a pretty easy way to do it, pretty clean. You don't have to clutter your BASIC program with a seemingly unnecessary for loop. It's probably not quite as common for whatever reason. The for loop is still compatible with like a cassette loaded program, whereas of course using a separate bin is going to require you to use a disk system of some sort. Of course, that also includes CoCo SDC or DriveWire. So most people will have that these days, so not a big problem, but just to keep in mind. There are some other techniques that exist for where to tuck your assembly language or machine language program. It is possible to embed your code in a string. I think one limitation there is none of your binary values for your code can be a 0 because it'll kind of mess up the editor's handling of the string. There's probably some other caveats to that. I'm definitely not going into that here, but you may look around for it and be able to find a source there. Know where our programs go into memory, and we know how to get it there, or at least we think we do. So how do you actually execute your code when you're running from BASIC? Well, again, we're all probably familiar with, once we've done our load in, we do an exec, right? And that's probably the easiest way to do it. In fact, the loadm command will kind of set a default address based on the header of your bin file. So that if you do a loadm and then an exec, you don't even have to specify the address. It'll just go to whatever was the execution address for the last bin loaded. Or, of course, you can do an exec to a certain address, which is probably a better way to do it. If you're going to load assembly language or machine language code into memory, you can just exec it. And so this is if you have a program that really doesn't take any parameters and doesn't really return any results other than whatever it actually does. So if you had a little program that would draw a box on the screen, for example, you just exec it and it'll draw the box on the screen and it'll return to BASIC. That probably doesn't work very well because BASIC will probably not keep it in the same graphics mode, but bear with me. So you can just exec your program, and I think all you have to do is just an RTS. As long as you don't modify the stack within your program, you just go and execute whatever you're going to do, and when you get back to the end of your program, you just do an RTS and return up the stack back to BASIC. I actually use this technique in the driver program I use for the demos of my CoCo 3 digital video player, and it works fine. It's not the prettiest thing, but it does work. Beyond that, It's a little bit different if you're using Color Basic or Extended Color Basic. If you're using Color Basic, there is a kind of a built-in basic command that's sort of designed to run your assembly language code. And the way it does that is it reserves a couple of addresses in memory for one specific 16-bit address. And then so you actually poke it in. It's at the decimal address is 275 to 276. And you can poke in the big Indian address of wherever your assembly language routine is. And then you can execute it with the command called USR obviously for user, which you then pass. Typically, you pass a dummy variable to. It doesn't really get used. I'm not entirely sure why it's there. Probably just because. Probably if you don't have it, it probably gives the the interpreter some indigestion of some sort. Later, we'll hear that you actually can pass arguments in there, at least in Extended Color Basic. But let's not get there just yet. So again, on Color Basic, you can only have one routine, one user-written routine. So you poke the value into a certain location in memory, and then you call it with USR. That's sort of similar to I know in like AppleSoft on the Apple II, there's place you can poke stuff, and I'm not sure if you can use user for that. I think maybe there's some other kind of special character. I don't know. I bet Mark Overholzer can tell us. I could probably tell you. I just have to do more research. If you're not using Color Basic, if you're using an Extended Color Basic or like the CoCo 3 Super Color Basic or whatever the official name is, which is really whatever it is that's built on them Extended Color Basic, there's a facility that allows you to have more than one. I think you can go up to 9 user programs. Yeah, 0 through 9, so 10 really. And so instead of having to poke an address, you can actually do, the command is actually def, DEF, and then I'm not sure the space is required. Maybe it's required. I think not. So def, let's say def space USR, maybe DEF USR is acceptable. But def, user, and the number 0 to 9. And so you can have up to 10 of these user-defined routines that you've poked into memory or loaded into memory. But again, you call them, instead of calling it with a USR, then you can call it with a USR 0 or USR 2 or whatever. And again, you can pass an argument to it. And in fact, you also can assign when it returns back, just like any other function you might call. I don't know if you can do these together. Probably not, but that'd be kind of cool. So that would give you 11. Somebody figure that out and get back to me. If you can use the Color Basic poke into a 275, and then user with no number, and then use the Extended Color Basic def user 0 through 9 to give you, instead of 0 through 9, you'd have a nothing, and then 0 through 9, so 11 different ones. I don't know. I'm not interested enough to look at it right now. But if you really need that extra one, maybe that's a possibility for one more user function. All right. So anyway, like I said, you already could call a function and not pass it to anything and not return anything. And you can do that with exec. And in fact, even with exec, if you want to exchange information between the basic program and your assembly language program, you can just set aside a piece of memory somehow, probably in the block that you've allocated for your assembly language program. And then you can use peek and poke on the basic side to read or write that memory. And then, of course, you can use loads and stores in your assembly language program to read and write that memory. And exchange information that way. And again, I use that technique in my driver program for my digital video player to basically identify where on the compact flash card each video starts and what format to use for the playback. Pokes that into certain memory, and the player looks that up and sets up the correct video mode and starts reading data from the correct place. So that works pretty well, kind of for just whatever you want to do. And theoretically, you can peek and poke whatever. You can even access the basic variables, although we'll get that well, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but I'll mention that later, that you can just access the basic variables directly if you have the information on how to get to them. A simpler thing to do, if you want to return a value to basic, you can simply load an integer value into the D register, which is the A register and the B register together. And then you can call, instead of doing an RTS, you can just directly jump to a function in the ROM that's called givabf, which is probably give a buffer or something like that. But you can just jump to that location, and the basic ROM will then take that integer value, that 16-bit integer value in the D register, and convert it to the floating point value that BASIC uses, the floating point equivalent value that BASIC uses for all numbers, at least Color BASIC does, and store it so that when you actually get back to your BASIC program, if you had called your routine with something like A equals USR 0, and then whatever value you put in the D register will now be available in the A variable within BASIC. So that's kind of cool. You can just, it's an easy way to use a machine language program to do a computation and maybe do it very quickly. Once we know how to pass that memory back to BASIC, or pass the value back to BASIC, then the question is, how do you pass the value from BASIC into the program? And so again, you can do the peeks and pokes in the reserved memory, like I was mentioning before, just kind of in the other direction. The other thing is you can actually, whatever that value, the variable you put within the parentheses of that user call, that can be made available to your machine language program as well. And so the first thing that you need to do is you need to check if the register A in your assembly language program, if register A is 0, that means you've been passed a numeric argument. Now, numeric arguments, again, BASIC uses floating point format for all of its numeric values. Why is that? Probably because it's the most flexible format available. It's not necessarily the fastest. That's probably a topic for totally another time. Anyway, unlike some of the other versions of Microsoft BASIC, there are no integer variables or whatever, so there's only floating point variables. Floating point and string variables, of course. So anyway, if you get to your assembly language and the value, your assembly language routine or program, and the A register contains a 0, then there's a numeric argument waiting for you. If that's the case, then there's a floating point value stored in a piece of memory that BASIC has allocated for itself that it calls the floating point accumulator. Otherwise, if A is not 0, it means that you're dealing with a string argument, and the register X has the address to a string descriptor. That's a format that BASIC uses internally for how to describe strings. So if you do have a 0 in that A register, you're dealing with a numeric argument. Like I said, the numeric value is still sitting out there in the floating point accumulator. Not very useful to you without some contortions. So there's another function called intcnv, which probably stands for integer convert. That's at address hex B3ED. The give a buff that we mentioned earlier is at address hex B4F4 for those taking notes. So anyway, int converts at hex B3ED. You can just jump to that, do a JSR rather to that routine, and it will convert that floating point value to an integer and return to your program. And then you can take whatever value has been passed into you from BASIC and do whatever you need to. And so instead of just doing a blank calculation on unknown or on a pre-specified data chunk, if you want to do a calculation on a variable value, then this is how you pass that in from BASIC to your code. Now again, if you call this int convert routine and the argument actually wasn't a string, or actually wasn't a numeric value, then BASIC will error out with a type mismatch error. And if you've passed in a value that is outside the range that a 16-bit integer variable can hold, which would be from the lower negative 32,768 to the upper positive 32,767. If you're outside of that range, then BASIC will error out with an overflow. It's a good reason to check to make sure you're dealing with a numeric value before you call your routine. Of course, if you're writing the code, then make sure your BASIC program only passes integer values to your program if it expects to get one. It is possible, once you kind of have control in your machine language program, you can pretty much do whatever you want. You never really have to return, or you can return, and before you return, you can do pretty much whatever. Which even if BASIC didn't want to cooperate with passing values back and forth, you could still go get the stuff. So, like I said, you can use poke commands from BASIC to write out to memory, and then your program could read from memory or whatever. Your program could use knowledge of the basic memory map to go off and find the variable tables and root through them and figure out which kinds of variables are where and which variable is which one, and dig out its value. You can even assist that. You can use a variable function called var ptr, which is probably called var pointer, so that when you use your user function, instead of a equals USR0 parentheses b, you could use a equals USR0 parentheses var ptr parentheses x dollar or something, and then close parentheses a couple of times, and then what would be passed in would be a numeric value as a pointer to that register's descriptor. You can then use the int convert to go from the floating point equivalent to the integer equivalent of that value and use it as a pointer directly with the index registers in your assembly language. But then you have to understand how BASIC stores the values. And there's some descriptions of this. I'm not going to go into it here, but I'm going to provide some references at the end to the color computer manuals, and there's enough information in them that if you really want to root through a basic variable and find the information, you can do so. Anyway, you have to know about this stuff if you want to dig through memory and do this stuff. One other thing, when you're writing your assembly language program, you'll find, especially once you get to the point of calling subroutines, but even a lot of register manipulations will use the stack. It's pretty easy just to use a lot of stack space, especially if you start calling functions that call themselves, that's called recursion. If you use recursive algorithms, you can pretty quickly fill up a lot of stack space. So if you don't do a lot of that, if you're only using a limited amount of stack space, you can just leave the stack alone, the stack pointer alone, and you can use basic stack, the stack that BASIC is already using. And you can use about 30 bytes worth of stack space that way, and there won't be any problems. If you need to use more than about 30 bytes of stack, then you need to figure out your own stack area, and that needs to be accounted for in whatever memory you're setting aside for your program. And you'll need to point the stack pointer appropriately to that memory, and use the stack within your program. Then you'll need to put the stack pointer back to point to where BASIC had it before you return to BASIC, or else your program will just die. So keep that in mind. All right, talking about register usage along those lines. Basically the S register, that's the stack pointer. It needs to be saved. It needs to be the same when you exit your program as it was when you got there. Otherwise, BASIC's going to blow up, and you just won't be happy. Now, in the couple of versions of the manual, it goes out and tells you, okay, the A, the B, and the X registers, and of course the condition code register, do not have to be saved inside your BASIC routines. And that's great, that's fine, you're going to use those a lot. And one question is, well, what about Y and U? And so I don't know. I didn't look into it, and it's probably worth some experimentation. You could probably look in the BASIC Unraveled books and make that determination for yourself. But I don't know if you need to save Y and U or not. I do know that the color basic for the 6809, or the basic for the 69 in general from Microsoft, is heavily derived from the 6800 version of basic for Microsoft. Even has some of the same Easter eggs, possibly even some of the same bugs. So, of course, the 6800 and, the 6801, 6803, like in the MC10, those don't have a Y register or a U register. It may be that it's just unused. It may be that we are using it for something in the 6809 basic, and but whoever wrote the manual just didn't know to ask about the Y and U registers, or just didn't think it mattered. I don't know. So if you are writing assembly language code and you're clobbering your Y or U registers, you may want to look at that and make sure you're not doing that, especially if you have something weird happening that's associated with the Y or U registers when you return from your program. Or you just save them and just be safe and not worry about it. We've got a few references. I'm going to highly recommend that you read basically all of the Tandy color computer manuals that are associated. There's the original Getting Started with Color Basic. You want to look in section 4, particularly part B. Part A, I think, gives a pretty decent overview of how to handle the graphics hardware. If you have the really old version of the manual, it may not have those chapters. I don't know. The two that I have in hand right now have all the chapters, so it's hard to say. But your mileage may vary. But in addition to that, getting ahead with Extended Color Basic, chapter 15 covers some of the same ground, although it does talk about the difference between having to poke into memory for the USR routine to work versus calling the def USR functions. Definitely want to check out the Getting Ahead or Going Ahead with Extended Color Basic. And then, of course, there's the Getting Started with Extended Color Basic, which is sort of the combination manual that came with the later CoCos, or at least the CoCo 3s. You want to look at chapter 34 there. Now, as I read across them, I find it definitely covers most of the same areas. The give a buff routine, the var pointer, the int convert routine, that sort of stuff. But occasionally there's little tidbits in one or the other. If you really understand this, if you really want to understand what you're doing, you probably should read them all. Now, of course, there's nothing in the Tandy manuals that will actually teach you anything about assembly language. There's a couple of short examples, maybe, that if you can learn assembly language from those short examples, you are awesome. But probably you also need a more specific reference for assembly language. If you want something that actually is tailored for the color computer, my best recommendation is William Barden's TRS-80 Color Computer Assembly Language. It's a great book. I know he's recently asked to have the PDFs taken down from the Color Computer Archive. I don't know, the real copies are out there. They're not, I don't know, maybe they're harder to find than they used to be, but there's a lot of them out there. You can probably find one. I'd say it's worth doing. And you might still be able to find a PDF as well if you really need one. Another one that's a little bit harder to find, covers a lot of the same area, just maybe from a different perspective. Good to have both. Is the Lawrence T. Polt's Assembly Language Programming for the TRS-80 Color Computer. I think there's one from Don Inman. I don't have the reference to it available right here, but that one's not bad either. Anyway, so there's 2 or 3 options that kind of keep the color computer in mind and probably provide some exercises that are relevant to the color computer, which will be helpful when you're learning assembly language. Just from the processor itself standpoint, there are the 2 classics. One from a former CoCo crew interviewee, Lance Leventhal, the 6809 Assembly Language Programming book. And then his rival, Rodney Zach's Programming of the 6809. Those are handy books to have. I'm sure there's several others that provide some more depth onto writing specific kinds of routines or whatever. I don't know, by the time you need those books, you're pretty far beyond what I'm providing here, which is just an overview of how to make basic and assembly language play nice together. Like I said, this isn't a full education. Don't walk away thinking you've earned a badge. I'm basically just trying to tell you what kinds of things are possible and where to go look it up in the manual, what to look for, but you're still going to have to do some footwork yourself. All right. I think that probably covers it. So if you are out there, if you want to learn some assembly language, if you're maybe apprehensive about going straight into it completely, full board, 100% assembly language, if you're an experienced basic programmer, especially if you've got a basic program that mostly works but you'd like to enhance the performance of, it's a really good technique is to use the existing logic of your program and just replace certain bits with assembly language, and you'll see wonderful improvements, or you can, assuming you optimize the right place. I hope this is useful to you. I hope you've enjoyed it. Can't always be young, but we can be retro forever. So, CoCo forever.
Over time, all CoCos suffer from performance loss and increased electricity consumption. That's because even the best-made CoCos create bit plaque during computation. These plaque deposits build up on integrated circuits, causing a variety of performance problems, including increased power consumption, random resets, excessive heat, and clock skips. CoCo Renew is specially formulated to remove up to 99% of bit plaque buildup.
My Color Computer 3 was really getting hard to use. It would keep resetting right in the middle of King's Quest. Do you know how frustrating it is to lose your place in a game? I was about ready to throw away my CoCo 3 and buy a new one. But then I discovered CoCo Renew.
Cosmic rays, beta particles, and the interaction of the moon and Earth's magnetic fields only make the problem of bit plaque accumulation worse.
I tried everything. I reseated chips, I replaced caps, I even replaced the transformer. Diagnostics all passed, but my CoCo was still randomly locking up. I was getting so frustrated, I couldn't even sleep. I started to drink heavily, all because I couldn't figure out what was wrong with my CoCo. My life was beginning to spin out of control. But then life changed when I discovered CoCo Renew.
CoCo Renew's patent-pending formula not only removes bit plaque, but also protects your computer from future plaque buildup.
Since using CoCo Renew, my system is rock-steady stable.
One application of CoCo Renew, and it's like a new machine.
Find your GPS coordinates and look them up on the easy-to-use Lunar Magnetic Calendar. This will tell you which day of the month to use CoCo Renew. Then simply disconnect the transformer and the keyboard from your CoCo's motherboard. Slide it into the included Perspex tray and gently pour CoCo Renew over the motherboard until it's entirely submersed. Place the cover over the tray and leave for 24 hours. Remove the motherboard using the included tongs and gloves. Rinse the motherboard gently with a garden hose and allow to dry for 24 hours. Now place the motherboard in the included striped Mylar envelope. Seal it and place it in a dark area for 3 days. Gently remove the motherboard from the envelope and scrub with denatured alcohol using the included brush. Gently rinse the motherboard with a garden hose and allow to dry for 24 hours. Now find the Julian date on the Lunar Magnetic Calendar to find the best time of day to reinstall the motherboard. Reconnect the keyboard and transformer. That's all there is to it. Now your CoCo will perform like new.
No more resets. No more lost games.
No lockups, it runs cooler, and I've started to attend AA meetings.
Don't throw away your color computer. Renew it with CoCo Renew.
Thanks, CoCo Renew.
And coming soon, CoCo Renew PAL, Dragon Renew, and MC10 Renew. Persons using this product assume responsibility for its use in accordance with current directions of the manufacturer. CoCo Renew makes no representations or warranties of any kind, either express or implied, regarding this information or the product to which this information refers. CoCo Renew contains leprechaun plasma derivatives and polyisobutylene. Women who are pregnant or may become pregnant should not be exposed to CoCo Renew. Do not drink or ingest CoCo Renew. Read all warnings and product information before using CoCo Renew. Drinking problem? Visit www.aa.org.
Hello all you CoCo cruisers, and welcome back to Neil's Corner on episode 37. For a change on this segment, I'm going to talk about something not from the past, but something current, or at least I should say recent. I'm going to be talking about a new homebrew video game for your CoCo 3 called Timberman. It was coded by a fellow named Paul Thayer with Simon Jonassen. Both of these guys are very active in the CoCo community. I'm sure most of you have heard of Simon Jonassen, as he's a huge demo scene guy in the CoCo world, and we've also had him on this show. Paul is also very active in the community and is already working on a new game called Downland 2. He also keeps a blog you can follow if you want to read about his adventures into game development on the CoCo. Paul has his own label he releases his games under called CoCo Brothers, which I think is cool. I believe it's called CoCo Brothers because his brother helps him with some of these projects. Another real interesting thing to note is that Timberman was Paul's first game written in 6809 assembly language. He used this project to teach himself assembly. Up until this point, all his games were done in BASIC. Well, I must say that it's very impressive. I always like hearing stories like this when people learn something new from a project they've taken on. Alright, enough chit-chat. On to the actual game. Timberman requires a Tandy Color Computer 3 with 128K of memory and a joystick. Also to note, the joystick must be plugged in the right joystick port. So if you haven't already got your CoCo 3, I highly suggest you do. You'll be able to play this awesome game and finally be able to say, yes, I do have my CoCo 3. Timberman is based on the smartphone game, also called Timberman. I actually installed Timberman on my Android phone, and it's very close. Now, I'm not just saying this, but I do prefer the CoCo version. The object of the game is super simple, but fun and addictive. Your goal is to chop down the world's largest tree. You move your character side to side and avoid branches coming down at you as you're chopping the tree down. Every time you get a chop, your points will increase by 1, showing you how many chops you got in total. But to add to the game's strategy, you also have a timer bar at the bottom, and the longer you wait without chopping, the bar will decrease in time. You want to stay quick and alert, constantly chopping and avoiding being hit with a branch. It's very simple, but keeps you hooked and wanting to get a better score all the time. There are also 6 different unlockable characters. I haven't unlocked any yet, but I did just receive this game a few nights ago before doing this review. One last cool feature to mention is it actually saves your game progress. Just be sure to properly exit the game when you're done so it can save your progress update. The graphics are really impressive and it really does showcase the color set on the CoCo 3. I also like the CoCo Brothers animation logo on boot up. Definitely a nice touch. I reached out to Paul Thayer to buy this game and help support a fellow CoCo game coder. When I received this game, I was overly surprised on the quality of it. Even the game manual is fantastic. Nice illustrations and proper wording. The whole package was extremely well done. Paul is still selling this game, and you can purchase it in a few different ways. The full package includes the case, SD card, and manual. You can also opt out and pay less to get a proper download link from his website, which includes the game in a DSK image format and the manual in a PDF file. So I'd like to give a big thumbs up to Paul and Simon for creating this excellent game. It definitely is great to see new games being made for the CoCo. Keep up the great work, Paul, and I'm looking forward to Downland 2. Well, there you have it. Another new game you can enjoy on your CoCo 3. I'll be sure to leave the contact information in the show notes for where you can buy this game if you'd like to purchase a copy for yourself. Well, until next month, happy CoCo gaming.
Back to more retro goodness with the CoCo crew.
Well, it's that time. We've reached the end of the podcast, episode 37. Once again, I'd like to thank our host John Linville for procuring all the news articles each month and providing us with another fantastic tech segment. Thanks goes out to Mike Rowan for creating these amazing commercials you hear each month and also doing all the editing on the show. Also like to thank Boise for being a part of the show again this month. It's great to have you on. Huge thanks goes out to everyone who participated in the roundtable discussion. And last but not least, a big thanks goes out to all of you who listen to us each month. We appreciate the support and your feedback. Until next month, happy CoCoing and retro forever.
It's a blast from the past.
Please listen carefully.
CoCo. 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 CoCo.
Dance like there's no tomorrow.
What is this crazy rock and roll music anyway? It's a blast from the past.
Dance, dance, dance. Dance, dance, dance.
CoCo.